Hey there, story lovers. This is The Fiction Wizard, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Gringotts' blood ritual at age 7 found 52 active loyalty potions and Dumbledore's 38-year theft plan exposed to Wizengamot? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1. The letter meant for the vault. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like dust and old spiders, and Harry Potter had long since stopped minding either. He'd organized the space with the careful precision of someone who'd learned early that neatness was the only form of control available to him. His 2 shirts hung on a bent nail. His 1 pair of trousers that mostly fit sat folded on the narrow shelf above his cot. The single blanket, thin, pilled, smelling faintly of the lavender Uncle Vernon's mother had stuffed into it before she died, was pulled tight across the mattress because making the bed properly took up 30 seconds, and those 30 seconds felt like his. Everything in the cupboard was exactly where Harry put it, which was more than he could say for the rest of number 4, Privet Drive, where his existence was tolerated the way one tolerates a drafty window, loudly, repeatedly, and with ongoing resentment about the cost. Today was July 31st, Harry was 7 years old, and he'd known about his birthday for approximately 45 minutes, roughly the same amount of time it had taken Aunt Petunia to count the number of presents stacked in the sitting room for Dudley and realize she'd accidentally bought 1 fewer than last year. The resulting panic had been theatrical. Vernon had driven off in the car to fix the problem. Dudley was watching cartoons with the volume turned up so high the windows hummed. Petunia was in the kitchen making Dudley's cake, the one with the 3 layers of buttercream that Harry wasn't allowed to eat. So Harry was sitting in his cupboard in the dark, knees to his chest, listening to the house breathe around him, when something hit the front door. Not knocked. Hit. A sound like a fist made of stone connecting with solid oak, once, with absolute authority. Harry heard Petunia make a sharp sound in the kitchen. He heard the scrape of her stool, the click of her heels across the hall tile. He heard the door open, and then a silence that lasted just long enough to be interesting. "There is no one here for that name," Petunia said, in the voice she used when she wanted to sound like she'd never been afraid of anything in her life. Another sound, lower, like gravel being sorted by careful hands. "The letter," said a voice, "is addressed to Mr. Harrison James Potter, cupboard under the stairs, number 4 Privet Drive, Surrey. It is a Gringotts notice of mandatory inheritance ritual, required by the Vault's Inheritance and Lineage Act of 1842. It cannot be redirected, refused, or destroyed. Attempting any of the 3 carries a fine of 4,000 galleons and a mandatory audit of all adjacent financial holdings." A pause. "That would include your husband's pension fund, his personal accounts, and the joint savings you maintain at Barclays under your maiden name." The silence that followed was a different kind entirely. "Harry," Petunia called, her voice stripped down to something almost unrecognizable. "Come to the door." Harry unfolded himself from his cot, opened the cupboard, and padded barefoot down the hall. The goblin standing on the front step was shorter than Harry, which was not something Harry could say about many people. He had the color of old bronze, skin and eyes both, and the kind of stillness that didn't come from patience so much as from absolute certainty that the world would wait for him. He wore robes the color of banknotes. He held a sealed envelope in one hand and a leather-bound ledger in the other, and he looked at Harry with the focused, assessing attention of someone counting something. "Harrison James Potter," the goblin said. It wasn't really a question. "Harry," Harry said. Just Harry. The goblin's expression didn't shift, but something in his eyes did, a fractional recalibration. He held out the envelope. "My name is Sharpfang. I am a senior accounts associate at Gringotts Bank, London. This letter has been held in our courier queue since your birth and released automatically on your 7th birthday in accordance with the terms of your father's estate instructions." He glanced past Harry to where Petunia stood in the hallway with her arms wrapped around herself. "You should read it privately." Harry took the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. The wax seal on the back showed a crest he didn't recognize, a griffin and a stag flanking a shield, with a Latin phrase curving underneath that he couldn't read, and his full name was written across the front in ink that seemed, when he tilted it, to shift between gold and deep, dark red depending on the light. He looked at the goblin. He looked at the envelope. He thought about the cupboard and the thin blanket and Dudley's 3-layer birthday cake. "I'll read it right now," Harry said. Sharpfang stepped back half a pace and waited. Harry broke the seal. The letter inside was written on thick cream parchment in 2 different hands. The first was precise, formal, clearly drafted by a solicitor, by the terms of the last will and testament of James Charles Potter, Lord of the ancient and noble house of Potter, and the last will and testament of Lily Evangeline Potter, née Evans, holder of the Evans family magical bequests. The bearer of this letter is hereby notified of their right to a mandatory inheritance blood ritual, to be conducted at Gringotts Bank, London, in the presence of senior account staff, no later than 7 days following the bearer's 7th birthday. Failure to complete this ritual within the specified window will result in the automatic transference of all Potter family trusts, vaults, properties, and holdings to the designated secondary beneficiary as named in the sealed secondary bequest. The ritual is non-negotiable. The timeline is absolute. The second hand was different, less formal, more cramped, like someone writing in a hurry or writing through something that made it hard to breathe. "Harry, if you're reading this, you're 7 years old and I'm not there to give you a proper birthday. I'm sorry for that more than I can write down. The ritual is safe. It won't hurt. It will just show you what's yours. Your mother and I wanted you to know what you come from. We wanted you to know you are loved. Not because of anything you've done or will do, but just because you exist and you are ours. Go to Gringotts. Trust the goblins, they keep their word better than most wizards I've known. Happy birthday, son." Dad. Harry read it twice. He read the second part 3 times. Then he folded the letter carefully along its original creases and put it back in the envelope and held it in both hands for a moment. Sharpfang was watching him with the same quiet, cataloging attention. "When do we go?" Harry asked. "I have a port key," Sharpfang said. "It activates in 4 minutes. I suggest you put on shoes." Harry put on shoes. Gringotts in the early morning was a different creature than the one Harry had vaguely heard about from overheard adult conversations. Without the press of tourists and shoppers, the great marble hall breathed differently, slower, deeper, the way old buildings breathe when they finally have space to. The ceiling soared up into shadows. The chandeliers burned with a cold golden light that seemed to come from inside the crystals rather than from any flame. The goblins behind the long counter moved with the focused efficiency of people for whom time is not wasted but invested, and the whole place smelled of metal and old parchment and something underneath both that Harry couldn't name, something that made the back of his neck prickle in a way that felt, strangely, like recognition. Sharpfang led him past the main counter and through a door that Harry suspected most visitors never saw, a narrow door, almost hidden in the paneling, opened with a key Sharpfang wore on a chain around his neck. The corridor beyond was shorter and quieter, lit by wall-mounted torches that burned blue, and it ended in a room that was clearly not for customers. The room was circular, with walls of dark stone and a floor inlaid with a pattern of concentric rings, each ring engraved with runes that shifted slowly as Harry watched, cycling through configurations too fast to follow. In the center of the ring stood a stone basin roughly the height of Harry's chest, carved from a single piece of pale gray granite, and filled with a liquid that wasn't quite water. It moved too slowly, with a weight to it, and it caught the torchlight and threw back more colors than torchlight should contain. An older goblin was already in the room, standing beside the basin. He was smaller than Sharpfang and very still, with eyes the precise color of old iron and a face that had more creases in it than a crumpled map. He wore robes of deep burgundy and held his hands clasped behind his back. "Harrison Potter," said Sharpfang. "This is Director Ragnarok. He oversees all inheritance and lineage procedures for accounts of significant historical standing." Harry said, which he was beginning to think was going to be his contribution to every formal introduction for the rest of his life. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Not unkindly. Not kindly either, exactly, more the way someone looks at a document they've been waiting to examine for a very long time and are now trying to decide whether they want to be right or wrong about what it contains. Your father's account, Ragnarok said, has been flagged for review for 6 years. The flag was placed by my predecessor, who noted several irregularities in the post-mortem handling of the Potter estate and was subsequently discouraged from pursuing the matter. Something in the old goblin's face settled into a harder line. I was not discouraged. I simply waited for the correct procedural moment. His eyes moved to the basin. This is that moment. Shall we begin? Harry crossed to the basin. The ritual itself was simple. Sharpfang explained it in the same tone you'd use to explain how to fill out a form. Harry would place his right hand flat on the surface of the liquid and hold it there until the basin finished its reading, which would take between 3 and 7 minutes depending on the complexity of what it found. The liquid would react to his magical signature, his bloodline, and the current state of his magical core. Anything placed on him magically, any charms, compulsions, potions residue, or bound inheritances, would surface. It was, Sharpfang said, essentially the same as a medical scan, just for magic instead of bones. Does it hurt? Harry asked. No, said Ragnarok. It will be warm. Harry placed his hand flat on the surface. It was warm. That was the first thing, a gentle, spreading warmth that moved up his arm and across his chest and settled somewhere around his sternum, not unpleasant, like sitting close to a fire. The liquid beneath his palm began to move, slow circuits spreading outward from where he touched it, and the color shifted from its resting near clear through gold, through a deep amber, through red. Then it went dark. Not the darkness of something ending. The darkness of something very old waking up. The runes on the floor lit up one ring at a time, moving outward from the basin, and Harry felt something in him respond, a sensation he had no words for at 7 years old, except that it felt like being a door that had been locked for a very long time and was now, very slowly, being opened from the inside. The basin's surface began producing text, rising to the top of the liquid like words written on the underside of water. Sharpfang began reading them aloud in a level, professional voice that progressively became less level. Bloodline confirmation, Sharpfang read. Harrison James Potter, sole heir to the ancient and noble house of Potter, descended of the Potter family going back 11 generations, and through the Evans line, connected to the ancient family of Peveril. He paused. Through both maternal and paternal lines. Peveril, Ragnarok said quietly, and something passed across the director's face that was not quite surprise. Magical core assessment, Sharpfang continued. Core strength classified as. He stopped. What? Harry asked. Sharpfang looked at the basin, then at Ragnarok, then continued in a very carefully neutral voice. Core strength classified as Archon-level. This designation has not appeared in a Gringotts reading in 112 years. The room was very quiet. Harry watched the words rise and dissolve on the surface of the liquid and didn't fully understand what they meant, but he understood the silence the way you understand weather, by feel, by the change in pressure, by the way the adults in the room had gone suddenly, acutely still. What's Archon-level? He asked. Extremely rare, Ragnarok said. Extraordinarily powerful. The last recorded Archon-class core belonged to. He paused. To someone who used that power very poorly. Before that, the designation appeared perhaps 4 times in recorded wizarding history. He looked at Harry steadily. It is not something to be afraid of. Continue, Sharpfang. Inheritance status, Sharpfang read. Potter family primary vault, intact. Potter family secondary vault, intact. Potter family trust vault, vault 713, partially drained. His voice had gone flat in the way that meant he was working very hard to keep it flat. Irregularity noted. Continuous withdrawals detected from Trust Vault 713 commencing October 1981 and continuing to present. Withdrawals made under proxy authority claimed by Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry blinked. He knew the name. He didn't know how he knew it, it had never been said to him directly, but it lived somewhere in the house, in the way Aunt Petunia sometimes went tight-lipped and distant, in the way Uncle Vernon occasionally said those people with a particular inflection. A wizard. An important one. Someone connected to his parents. How much? Ragnarok asked, his voice quiet and precise. Sharpfang was quiet for a moment. Over 38 years of projected withdrawals, accounting for the current balance and original capitalization at time of deposit, the total extraction amounts to approximately 1.3 million galleons. The room was so quiet Harry could hear the torches burning. Continue, Ragnarok said. Sharpfang continued. His voice was steady, but Harry could see his hands were gripping the ledger tighter than they'd been before. Bequests. The will of James Charles Potter named the following guardians in order of preference: Sirius Orion Black, Godfather, primary guardian. Frank and Alice Longbottom, secondary guardians. The will of Lily Evangeline Potter named the same order with the addendum that in no circumstance was Harrison James Potter to be placed in the custody of Petunia Elizabeth Desley née Evans, whose lack of magical connection renders her. Sharpfang stopped. He looked at the words in the basin. He read them again. Renders her unsuitable for the protection of a child of Lily's magical line, who will require magical understanding and connection to develop safely. Harry thought about the cupboard. He thought about it very specifically: the dust, the spider webs, the thin blanket, the way the lock clicked when it was fastened from the outside on the nights when he'd apparently been too much of a bother. He didn't say anything. He kept his hand on the basin. Guardianship record, Sharpfang continued. Primary guardian Sirius Black currently held at HM Prison Azkaban. Trial record, Sharpfang stopped again. Trial record, none found. Ragnarok closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them. Continue to potions analysis, he said, very quietly. Potions analysis, Sharpfang said, and now he was speaking with the slow deliberateness of someone reading something they would very much like to be misreading. The following active compounds have been detected in the bloodstream of Harrison James Potter, currently interacting with his magical core and producing sustained behavioral and emotional modification effects. He began to read the list. It took a while. Harry stood with his hand flat on the basin's warm surface and listened to Sharpfang read 52 separate potions compounds, each one named, classified, and annotated with its primary effect. By the time Sharpfang reached the 30th, the warmth in Harry's chest had gone from comfortable to something else. Not pain, not anger, something more fundamental than either, the feeling of a foundation being tested and holding. The list included, among others, a low-grade loyalty compulsion keyed to Albus Dumbledore, active since approximately November 1981. A submission variant of the same compound, distinct formulation, layered over the first. Something Sharpfang identified as a diminishment compound, which suppressed spontaneous magical expression and kept Harry's core running below its natural capacity. 3 separate variants of a docility brew. Something called a fate-binding tincture that Ragnarok identified, in a voice stripped of all professional distance, as wholly illegal under the Magical Persons Protection Act of 1943. An impression potion keyed to create positive emotional responses to the presence of Albus Dumbledore specifically. And 42 other compounds of varying intensity and purpose, some designed to interact with each other, several layered in ways that Sharpfang said indicated deliberate pharmaceutical architecture, not accidental accumulation, but systematic construction. Someone, Sharpfang said, when he finished the list, has been brewing and administering these compounds for 6 years. Most of them require renewal every 3 to 6 months. The renewal mechanism for several of them is. He checked the basin. Environmental. Embedded in objects. Possibly in food or drink sources. Harry thought about the house on Privet Drive. He thought about the meals, the ones he wasn't supposed to eat much of, the ones that were prepared separately, the ones that Petunia always handed him directly rather than letting him serve himself. He took his hand off the basin. He looked at Ragnok. "Someone's been poisoning me," he said. Ragnok did not soften it. Harry found he appreciated that more than he could say. "Yes," the director said. "For approximately 6 years, by the evidence in this basin, with compounds designed to make you compliant, loyal to a specific individual, less aware of your own power, and emotionally dependent on that individual's approval." He held Harry's gaze. "This is a serious crime under goblin law, human wizarding law, and several international magical treaties. It is arguably the most serious magical crime that can be committed against a person." Harry nodded. He was processing it in the quiet, methodical way that children process things that are too large to be emotional about immediately, filing it, categorizing it, setting it aside in a place where it could be properly examined later. Right now there was more to understand. "Sirius Black," Harry said. "You said there's no trial record." "Correct," Ragnok said. "So he's in prison with no trial." "That appears to be the case. And he was supposed to be my guardian. According to both your parents' wills." Harry was quiet for a moment. The runes on the floor were still cycling, slower now, the basin's surface settling back toward its resting color. The room felt very large suddenly, or maybe Harry felt very small in it, not the kind of small that meant powerless, but the kind of small that meant you were only one person and there was a great deal of world that had arranged itself badly before you got here. "How do we fix it?" he asked. Something shifted in Ragnok's face. A very small shift, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching for it. "Gringotts," the director said carefully, "does not typically involve itself in wizarding legal matters." "Okay," Harry said. "But you said the withdrawals from my vault are a crime." "That's a Gringotts matter." Ragnok's mouth curved, barely. "Yes. And the potions are a crime." "Yes. And my guardian being locked up without a trial meant I ended up where I wasn't supposed to be, which means whoever arranged that was obstructing my parents' wills, which were filed with Gringotts." Ragnok looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Sharpfang, who had the expression of someone watching a very small person lift something very heavy and doing it easily. "The obstruction of a will filed with Gringotts," Ragnok said slowly, "is indeed a Gringotts matter." "Right," Harry said. "So what does Gringotts do about it?" Ragnok unclasped his hands from behind his back. He placed them on the edge of the stone basin and leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since Harry had entered the room, the director looked not like a bank official and not like a bureaucrat, but like something considerably older and considerably more dangerous than either. "Gringotts," Ragnok said, "files a brief of violation with the Wizengamot. It is a formal legal document carrying the full institutional authority of this bank, which has operated under wizarding law since 1478. It cannot be ignored, misfiled, or suppressed. When Gringotts files a brief of violation, the Wizengamot is required by statute to convene an emergency session within 14 days. His iron-colored eyes held Harry steadily. The last time Gringotts filed such a brief was in 1927. The resulting session lasted 3 weeks and ended with 2 sitting ministers losing their posts. Harry thought about his father's handwriting on the parchment. "Trust the goblins, they keep their word better than most wizards I've known." "Then file it," Harry said. They gave him a private room while the formal documentation was being assembled. It was a small, spare space, a table, 2 chairs, a window that showed the alley outside through glass so thick it greenish, and someone brought him tea and a plate of biscuits that he actually ate, because nobody here was giving him anything for strategic reasons, and that distinction mattered more than he would have been able to fully articulate. Sharpfang came and went, bringing documents for Harry to sign, authorization forms, confirmation of ritual results, a formal declaration of his intent to claim full Potter family inheritance rather than allow the secondary bequest to activate. Harry signed everything Sharpfang explained and asked about everything Sharpfang didn't, and Sharpfang explained those things too, with the slightly surprised patience of someone unaccustomed to the person across the desk actually wanting to understand what they were agreeing to. "The secondary bequest," Harry said, midway through the stack. "Who was it going to?" Sharpfang checked the ledger. "The Dumbledore Family Trust." Harry signed the authorization form. He did it very steadily. An hour into the documentation process, Ragnarok returned to the room and sat down across the table from Harry. He had a scroll with him, thick as Harry's wrist, covered in dense text and sealed with the Gringotts crest at both ends. "This is the brief of violation," Ragnarok said. "I want you to understand what it contains before it is filed, because once it is filed, the process moves at its own speed and certain things become impossible to contain." He set the scroll on the table between them. The brief documents the unauthorized withdrawals from Vault 713, the obstruction of the Potter wills, the wrongful detention of Sirius Black as it relates to the obstruction of guardianship, and the presence of 52 active potions compounds in your bloodstream, with the associated testimony of a certified Gringotts inheritance ritual. He paused. "It does not, at this stage, formally name the party responsible for the potions. That evidence will be presented at the Wizengamot session. But the withdrawals are documented with Dumbledore's signature on the proxy authority form. So the Wizengamot will know it's him before the session even starts," Harry said. "Yes." "Good," Harry said simply. Ragnarok studied him for a moment. "You are 7 years old," the director said, and it wasn't an accusation or a concern, more like someone checking a fact. "Yes," Harry said. "Most children your age, in your situation, would be frightened." Harry looked at the scroll. He thought about 52 potions designed to make him afraid of the wrong things and loyal to the wrong people and smaller than he was. He thought about 6 years of that, 6 years of being systematically shaped into something compliant and dull and grateful for small tolerances, and he thought about how much had been trying to grow through all of it anyway, like a plant through concrete, because it was his nature and nobody had managed to stamp that entirely out despite considerable effort. "I was frightened," Harry said. "Before I knew what I was frightened of. Now I know what it actually is and who actually did it." He looked at Ragnarok. "It's a lot easier to not be afraid when you can see the thing clearly." The director of Gringotts looked at Harrison James Potter for a long moment. "Your father," Ragnarok said, "opened his first account here at age 11. He came in with his friend Sirius Black and they spent 40 minutes arguing about the best way to invest a 15-galleon birthday gift." Something in the old goblin's face was not quite a smile, but something in the same family as one. "I processed that account myself. I remember thinking he would be trouble." He picked up the brief. "The apple does not fall far." He stood. Harry stood. Sharpfang appeared in the doorway. "The brief will be filed within the hour," Ragnarok said. "You will receive formal notification of the Wizengamot session date by OWL within 3 days. In the meantime, Gringotts will provide you with a formal letter establishing your status as the primary account holder of all Potter family vaults, to be used as needed." He looked at Harry with that measuring, careful attention. "Is there anything else you need today?" Harry thought about it. "A cleansing," he said. "For the potions. Can Gringotts do that?" "It will take several hours and will be uncomfortable," Sharpfang said. "Some of the compounds have been present long enough to." "I know," Harry said. He'd already worked that out. 6 years of something doesn't come out easily. "I want them out." Ragnarok nodded. He gestured to Sharpfang. "Arrange it." The cleansing took 4 hours. Sharpfang had said uncomfortable. That was a goblin's assessment of discomfort, which Harry suspected had a higher baseline than a human child's. It was done in a different room, this one warmer, with a healer, a goblin Harry didn't have a name for, compact and efficient, who spoke very little but whose hands were extraordinarily precise, and it involved a series of drafts that tasted progressively worse and produced progressively more dramatic physical responses. The first made him sweat through his shirt. The second made his hands shake for about 15 minutes in a way that was alarming but which the healer watched with calm, attentive eyes and pronounced normal. The third made him sick in a basin that the healer held with complete composure, and after that one, the room seemed clearer, not brighter, just clearer, like someone had cleaned glass Harry hadn't known was dirty. By the time the fourth draft was administered, the shaking had stopped and Harry was sitting on the treatment table wrapped in a rough blanket that had been heated by magic and thinking that he felt, for the first time in his conscious memory, like the air in his lungs was entirely his own. The healer ran a final assessment, a smaller basin, similar to the one upstairs, but the liquid here ran through a quick sequence and came up clean. No active compounds detected, the healer said, in precise, quiet tones. Core restriction lifted. Loyalty compulsions dissolved. Emotional modifiers cleared. She looked at Harry with the professional attention of someone assessing a patient. You may experience several days of disorientation as your magical core adjusts to operating without artificial suppression. Intense magical expressions may occur spontaneously. Do not attempt to suppress them. What kind of expressions? Harry asked. The healer considered this. Your core has been running at approximately 30% of its natural capacity for 6 years, she said. With the diminishment compound removed, it will seek its natural level. Think of water in a pipe that has been partially blocked suddenly having the blockage cleared. She paused. Things may break. Or float. Or catch fire briefly. Briefly, Harry said. In most cases, said the healer, with what might, very charitably, have been a touch of goblin humor. When Harry emerged from the treatment room, Ragnarok was waiting in the corridor. He handed Harry the formal account letter, heavy parchment, crest embossed in real gold, language so formal it could have stopped traffic, and walked him back through the narrow corridor and through the blue torch passage and through the door in the paneling and out into the great marble hall, where the morning was now well advanced and a handful of early customers were conducting business at the long counter. At the hall's entrance, Sharp Fong was waiting with the return port key. Harry stopped. He looked up at the marble columns, at the cold gold light, at the goblins moving with their careful, invested efficiency through the vast and ancient space. He thought about his father writing a letter to a son who wasn't born yet, filing instructions with a bank that kept its word better than most wizards, setting a mechanism in motion that would sit in a queue for 7 years and then knock on a door with the authority of stone and the precision of something that could not be refused. He thought, you knew. You put this in place because you knew something was wrong. He thought, I'm going to finish what you started. He picked up the port key. Thank you, he said to Sharp Fong, and he said it simply, the way you say it when you mean it completely. For coming to the door. You didn't have to make it easy. Sharp Fong looked at him. It was the legally correct procedure, the goblin said. But he said it with a dignity that was also, in its way, warmth. Harry gripped the port key. The world lurched sideways. He landed on the front step of number 4, Privet Drive, on his feet, which felt right. The house was where he'd left it, the exact same beige, the exact same net curtains, the exact same ordered suburban blankness that had always looked to Harry less like a home and more like an argument that nothing unusual was happening here. Vernon's car was back in the drive. Through the sitting room window, Harry could see the blue flicker of the television. He stood on the front step for a moment. He could feel it now, with the potions gone, the thing the healer had described as his core seeking its natural level. It was a sensation like having a second heartbeat, deeper and steadier than the first, and it ran in circuits through his body from his chest to the ends of his fingers and the soles of his feet and the top of his skull, and it was warm and it was his and it had always been his, and the fact that someone had spent 6 years trying to prevent him from feeling it produced in Harry a very clean, very quiet rage that had nothing frantic or wild in it, just clarity, clear as the air after a storm. He opened the front door and went inside. Petunia was in the hallway, waiting, with her arms still crossed and her face still doing the thing where it couldn't decide between fear and resentment. Vernon came out of the sitting room when he heard the door, face already going red in the preparatory way, starting to formulate the usual speech about not walking in like you own the place and proper gratitude. Harry held up the Gringotts letter. Not aggressively. Not as a threat. He just held it up, the way you hold up something that explains itself. Vernon stopped. I went to Gringotts today, Harry said. There's a Wizengamot session being called. There'll be people coming and going over the next few weeks, lawyers, probably, and probably some people from the wizarding world. The letter explains the basics. The bank's involved, so it's official. He looked at Vernon, then at Petunia. I won't be any trouble. I'm never any trouble. He paused. But I need to sleep in a proper room. The silence was extraordinary. Petunia made a small, compressed sound. The spare room, Harry said. That's all. He kept his voice even, matter of fact, the voice of someone who has simply decided how things are going to be. I'll stay out of your way. I'll keep doing the cooking and the garden. But I'm sleeping in the spare room now. Vernon's face cycled through approximately 6 different responses. His mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. Harry looked at him with the calm, clear attention of someone who has spent the morning learning exactly how much they are worth and has revised all previous estimates accordingly. Vernon closed his mouth. Fine, Petunia said, in a voice so flat it could have been used for paving. The spare room. Harry nodded. Thank you, he said, and went upstairs. Behind him, something in the hallway, a framed photo of Dudley at 4, mounted on the wall beside the stair, developed a small, distinctive crack down the center of the glass. Harry didn't look back. He went upstairs, to a room with a window and a real bed and walls that weren't a cupboard, and he sat down on the edge of the mattress and held his father's letter in both hands and read the second part again. Not because of anything you've done or will do, but just because you exist and you are ours. Outside the window, the July morning was going gold and wide and endless. Harry Potter was 7 years old, and the world was already beginning to understand that it had severely miscalculated. Chapter 2, What the Ledgers Remember. 3 days later, the owl arrived. Harry was in the back garden pulling weeds from Petunia's rose bed, not because anyone had asked him to, but because it was something to do with his hands while he thought, and he thought better when his hands were busy. The owl was enormous, black as coal, and it dropped a scroll bound in Gringotts gold ribbon directly into Harry's upturned palm with the accuracy of something that had been told exactly where to find him and had taken the instructions seriously. He wiped his hands on his jeans and unrolled it. The scroll confirmed the Wizengamot emergency session, August 14th, 11 days away. The session would be convened under Article 9 of the Gringotts Wizengamot Accord of 1489, which Sharpfong had explained meant mandatory attendance for all sitting members with no exceptions, no deferrals, and no procedural delays permitted. Attached to the back of the official notice, in Ragnar's precise handwriting, was a shorter note: a full accounting of the Potter estate irregularities will be presented at the session. Gringotts recommends that you attend in person. Provision 14b of the Magical Persons Act allows minors with established estate claims to address the Wizengamot directly when the claim directly concerns their welfare. I have taken the liberty of registering your intent to address the session. You are welcome to meet at Gringotts the day prior to review the documents. Harry rolled the scroll back up. In the kitchen window, Petunia's silhouette appeared and then withdrew quickly. She'd been doing that since his return from Gringotts, hovering at the edges of rooms, watching him with a complicated expression that sat somewhere between unease and something more conflicted that Harry didn't have the energy to analyze right now. The spare room was better. Having a window made an extraordinary difference, it turned out. He could hear birds in the morning and see the light change through the day and know what the weather was doing without having to open a door to find out. It seemed like a small thing. It wasn't. He went inside and wrote back to Ragnar with 4 words, "I'll be there." And sent it with the black owl, which accepted the reply with the gravity of a bird that understood its deliveries mattered. Then he went back to the rose bed and finished the weeding, and he thought about August 14th, and he thought about 52 potions, and he thought about a vault being drained for 38 years, and he thought, with the new particular clarity that had settled over him since the cleansing, about what it meant that all of this had been running simultaneously: the theft, the potions, the wrongful imprisonment of his godfather, the placement with people his mother's will had explicitly prohibited. Not coincidences. Not oversights. Architecture. Someone had built something. Harry pulled a weed up by the root, soil and all, and set it in the pile. The healer's prediction about spontaneous magical expressions proved accurate, if slightly understated. On the 4th day after the cleansing, Harry was washing up after breakfast when the water in the sink suddenly heated itself to exactly the right temperature without the hot tap being on. On the 5th day, he was thinking about what his parents' house at Godric's Hollow might look like, and every book on the small shelf in the spare room, left there by the previous owner of the house, overlooked in every subsequent clear-out, simultaneously opened to its first page, then closed again, as though agreeing on something. On the 6th day, he was walking past Dudley in the upstairs hallway, and Dudley, who had been building up to saying something unpleasant with the particular bovine patience of someone who'd been put off their rhythm and was looking to restore it, opened his mouth and then simply stopped, as though the thought had evaporated, and walked away. Harry hadn't done anything deliberate. He hadn't felt any obvious surge. He just looked at Dudley with the quiet attention that was becoming his default expression, and something in the space between them had communicated something that Dudley had received very clearly. The healer had said, "Do not attempt to suppress them." Harry wasn't suppressing anything. He was learning the new shape of himself, the way you learn a room that's been rearranged in the dark, carefully, with your hands out, feeling for what's changed. What was changed, he was finding, was almost everything. It wasn't a dramatic change. He hadn't woken up able to throw lightning bolts or speak to buildings. It was subtler and more pervasive than that. It was the difference between hearing a piece of music through a wall and hearing it in the same room. The notes were the same, but the depth and the detail were suddenly present, suddenly real in a way they hadn't been before. He could feel the magic in the house on Privet Drive, thin and reluctant, the kind of ambient magical residue that accumulates in any place where magic has been used repeatedly. He could feel something beneath the garden, something old and patient that wasn't interested in people but wasn't hostile either, just deep, and present, and entirely indifferent to suburban property boundaries. He could feel the ward lines around the property, the ones he now knew had been placed not for his protection exactly but for Dumbledore's purposes, and they felt the way a too tight collar feels, not agonizing, just constraining, present, something he was aware of every time he moved. On the 7th day, he decided to read. He went through every book on the spare room shelf, methodically, looking for anything useful. Most of them were mass-market paperbacks of no particular relevance, holiday reads, thrillers, a battered Agatha Christie. But tucked at the back, behind a stack of old Reader's Digest condensed editions, was a thin hardback with no title on the spine, its cover a plain dark blue, that turned out to be a basic introduction to wizarding law published in 1962. Harry read it twice. He found, in Chapter 4, a section on the Provision 14b, that Ragnarok had referenced, the Magical Persons Act clause allowing magically emancipated minors to address the Wizengamot directly. The clause went further than Ragnarok's note had implied. A magically emancipated minor, one recognized by Gringotts as the primary holder of a significant estate, could not only address the Wizengamot but could, under certain conditions, petition for accelerated legal majority, which if granted would give them the full legal standing of a wizarding adult, including the right to make binding decisions about their own guardianship, education, and financial affairs. The conditions included confirmation of estate claim, evidence of undue harm under previous guardianship arrangement, and a demonstration of sufficient maturity and reasoning capacity to the presiding chief warlock's satisfaction. Harry read the last condition twice. Then he put the book down and thought about it. The chief warlock of the Wizengamot was, according to the book, whoever currently held the post. He didn't know who that was in 1987. He suspected, given the way everything else in this situation connected back to the same person, that he could make a reasonable guess. He picked the book back up and found the section on conflicts of interest in Wizengamot proceedings. The morning of August 13th, Sharpfang appeared at the front door again, same time, same knock, different expression. This one was less formal announcement and more something that resembled, in a carefully professional way, anticipation. "The director is expecting you," Sharpfang said. Harry had his shoes on already. The room they used this time was not the ritual room but a proper meeting room, long table, high-backed chairs of dark wood, a window looking into an interior courtyard where a fountain ran with the same slow, color-catching liquid as the ritual basin. Maps on one wall, shelves of ledgers on another. On the table, laid out in ordered rows, were documents. A great many documents. Ragnarok was at the head of the table. Beside him sat a goblin Harry hadn't met, young, or at least younger than Ragnarok, with sharp features and a quill already in hand, and at the table's other end sat a human woman who looked up when Harry entered with an expression of absolute assessment. She was old, not ancient, but decisively old, in the way of someone who has lived a long time on their own terms and found the result satisfactory. White hair swept up with disciplined precision. Black robes with purple trim that managed to be severe and impressive at once. A face like the edge of a cliff, nothing soft in it, nothing wasted, but not unkind. She looked at Harry the way Ragnarok had looked at him during the ritual, that measuring quality, except where Ragnarok's assessment had been primarily professional, this woman's was something more personal. "Harry Potter," she said. "You're shorter than I expected." "Most people are taller than me," Harry said. "It's a common problem." The woman's mouth did something that was almost a smile. "Augusta Longbottom," she said. "I sit on the Wizengamot. I have for 30 years. I heard about the brief of violation through channels I won't bore you with, and I requested a meeting with Director Ragnarok because I have a personal stake in seeing this session conducted correctly." She paused. "Frank Longbottom was a friend of your parents. He and Alice are currently at St. Mungo's Hospital. They were tortured into insanity by Death Eaters 6 years ago." Something moved behind her eyes, deep, old, controlled grief, the kind that has been organized into purpose rather than abandoned to feeling. The Death Eaters involved were Bellatrix Lestrange and her associates, who received trials. Sirius Black, who was accused of different crimes, did not. I have been dissatisfied with that inconsistency for 6 years and lacked the procedural mechanism to address it. Her eyes held Harry's steadily. "You appear to have provided one." Harry looked at her. He looked at the documents on the table. He looked at Ragnarok. "Shall we go through it?" he said. What the ledgers remembered was everything. That was the thing about Gringotts, Harry was coming to understand. Goblins didn't just record transactions, they recorded context. Every withdrawal from Vault 713 was logged with the date, the amount, the stated justification, and the authorizing signature. Ragnarok walked Harry through the full accounting spread across the table, and the young goblin with the quill, whose name was Iron Teeth, which Harry stored carefully in his memory, took notes on everything. The first withdrawal had been dated November 3, 1981, 3 days after the night at Godric's Hollow. 20,000 galleons, drawn under a proxy authority signed by Albus Dumbledore, claiming the funds were for ongoing care and welfare provisions for the minor Harrison James Potter. The stated authorization was a guardianship claim. He was never legally granted guardianship, Ragnarok said. He said it in the precise tone of someone who has been wanting to say it to the right person for a very long time. No documentation exists in our records, in the Ministry's records, or in the records of the Wizengamot family registry. He simply signed a proxy authority form citing informal guardianship and made the withdrawal. "And nobody checked," Augusta said, from her end of the table. "It wasn't a question." In the immediate aftermath of the war's apparent end, Ragnarok said carefully, certain institutional checks were not performed with the rigor they warranted. Dumbledore was very popular in November 1981, Augusta said. "Very. People wanted to believe he had things in hand. It was convenient. She said the word convenient the way someone cuts paper, cleanly, with intent. Harry looked at the first withdrawal document. He looked at the signature, a large, practiced signature with flourishes, the signature of someone who had been signing things with authority for so long they didn't think about it anymore. He looked at the stated justification. Ongoing care and welfare provisions, Harry said. I was in a cupboard. Yes, Ragnarok said. Harry moved to the next document without comment, and Ragnarok continued. Over 38 years of projected withdrawals, the accountants had worked backwards from the current vault balance and the original capitalization, accounting for the magical compound interest applied to the trust. The total extraction came to 1.3 million galleons. Harry had absorbed this number during the ritual, but hearing it laid out in chronological order across a conference table made it concrete in a way the initial shock hadn't. He could see the architecture of it, the early large withdrawals that tapered down over the first few years, settling into a regular quarterly payment structure that had continued unbroken through all of Harry's life. Not impulsive theft. Not opportunistic skimming. A salary. Dumbledore had been paying himself a salary from Harry's estate for 38 years. What was it spent on? Harry asked. Ragnarok looked at him. That is a question for the Ministry's Financial Investigation Department, once the Wizengamot session initiates a formal inquiry. We can document what left the vault. Where it went afterwards is beyond our current evidence. He runs a school, Augusta said thoughtfully. Hogwarts operates on endowments, but the school's operational budget has always been flexible. There have been renovation projects over the years. Research grants awarded from unspecified private donations. Several positions were created in the last decade that don't appear in any formal budget submission. She paused. I am not saying these funds went to Hogwarts. I am saying that if someone were moving money discreetly, an institution they controlled with minimal external audit would be a convenient destination. Harry stored this too, in the organized filing system that had been developing inside him since July 31st, each piece of information placed where it could be connected to the others. He moved along the table to the next row of documents. The potion's evidence was presented in a separate section, clinical, detailed, assembled by the Gringotts Healing Division from the ritual analysis and the cleansing records. 52 compounds, each described with its composition, its likely administration method, and its effect. The healer who had performed the cleansing had provided a formal testimony document describing the state of Harry's core before and after, including measurements. The diminishment compound is the most significant of these, the young goblin Iron-Teeth said, speaking for the first time. His voice was higher than Ragnarok's, precise and fast. It was present in the highest concentration and had the longest continuous administration period. The effect on core development in a child of Archon classification is, he checked his notes. Significant. A child growing up with an unrestricted Archon class core would typically begin producing measurable and controlled magical outputs by age 4. Under sustained diminishment compound, that development is delayed, reduced, and in some cases redirected. Redirected how? Harry asked. The compound interacts with spontaneous magical expression and suppresses it, Iron-Teeth said. The magical energy has to go somewhere. Under suppression, it tends to go inward. What presents externally as an unusually quiet child, low magical output, minimal spontaneous incidents, is in reality a child whose core is under significant internal pressure. He paused. The analogy to a blocked pipe is accurate. Less accurate than its complement, that the child would have found this quietly physically uncomfortable for most of their life, in ways they would likely have attributed to other causes. Harry thought about the persistent headaches he'd always put down to stress. The way he'd sometimes wake in the night with his chest aching for no reason he could find. The exhaustion that was different from being tired, deeper, more pervasive, the kind that sleep didn't fix. Right, he said quietly. Okay. Augusta was watching him with a careful expression. Not pity, she didn't strike Harry as someone who trafficked in pity, but something in the vicinity of recognition, the look of someone seeing a familiar shape in a new place. The loyalty compulsions are equally important for the Wizengamot session, Ragnarok said, steering gently back to the documents. These compounds are classified as a Category 1 magical crime under the Magical Persons Protection Act of 1943. Administering them without consent to a minor carries a minimum sentence of 12 years in Azkaban per compound, with sentences to be served consecutively. He looked at Harry steadily. 52 compounds. Harry did the arithmetic very quickly. He didn't say it out loud. Some numbers speak for themselves. The question the Wizengamot will ask, Augusta said, leaning forward, is attribution. We have Dumbledore's signature on the vault withdrawals. For the potions, we need to establish he was the source. The administration method Sharpfang mentioned, environmental, embedded in objects, means we need to identify the specific vectors. I have a theory about that, Harry said. Everyone at the table looked at him. He'd been thinking about it since Sharpfang had described the renewal mechanism, environmental, possibly food or drink. And he'd been thinking about the house, and about Petunia's careful preparation of certain meals, and about who might have instructed her to add certain things to certain foods or to keep certain items in the cupboard. But he'd also been thinking about something else, something that Sharpfang had said more carefully, with greater precision, embedded in objects. When did Dumbledore place me with my aunt? Harry asked. November 1st, 1981, Ragnarok said. Did he visit? Leave anything? Ragnarok consulted the ledger. According to the Ministry's own records, which we obtained as part of the brief preparation, Albus Dumbledore was present at number 4 Privet Drive on the evening of November 1st, 1981, in the company of a Professor Minerva McGonagall and a man named Rubeus Hagrid. He left at approximately midnight. Ragnarok paused. The records do not specify whether any objects were left at the property. Harry thought about the cupboard. About the old lavender sachet in the thin blanket. About the specific, scratchy wool of it. He thought about how the smell of it had been pervasive, how it had been in the cupboard before anything else Harry had ever put in there, how it had been there as long as he could remember. I think I need someone to examine the cupboard under the stairs at my aunt's house, Harry said. Specifically the blanket that was in it. Silence. You slept in a cupboard, Augusta said, in a tone that was not a question and was doing considerable work to remain level. Until 11 days ago, Harry said. The silence that followed this was of a different quality than the previous ones. It had weight to it. Augusta Longbottom's expression had gone to something that was not yet anger but was clearly anger's immediate precursor, a kind of very still, very cold clarity that Harry found he respected enormously. Ragnarok, Augusta said, without looking away from Harry. I will arrange for a forensic magical examination of the property, Ragnarok said. Today. I'll go with them, Harry said. I live there. It's faster. You are 7 years old, Ragnarok began. You keep noting that, Harry said. It keeps being true. It hasn't changed anything yet. Ragnarok looked at him. Augusta looked at him. Ironteeth looked at him and made a small mark in his notes that might have been professional notation and might have been something else entirely. You will be accompanied, Ragnarok said, with finality. Of course, Harry agreed. The forensic examination of number 4 Privet Drive was, for the Dursley family, approximately the worst afternoon of their collective lives. 2 Gringotts forensic specialists, goblins Harry hadn't met before, who carried cases of instruments and spoke to each other in terse gobbledygook with the efficient shorthand of people who had done this many times and knew exactly what they were looking for, appeared at the front door at 2 o'clock accompanied by Harry and Sharpfang, who was carrying a formal notice of access rights that meant the Dursleys could not refuse entry without triggering a legal process that Sharpfang outlined in sufficient detail that Vernon's face went through 3 distinct colors before he stepped aside. Petunia stood in the hallway with her arms wrapped around herself and watched the goblins move through her house with the expression of someone watching their past catch up with them. The cupboard under the stairs took 12 minutes. Harry stood outside while the forensic specialists worked, and he listened to the precise sounds of their instruments and the occasional clipped exchange in gobbledygook, and he watched Petunia watch the door. "Did you know?" Harry asked her. Petunia flinched. Her arms tightened around herself. She didn't look at him. "Petunia," Harry said. Not accusatory. Just the question. "There were things in the basket of linens when he left," she said, very quietly, to the wall. "He said they would keep you calm. He said it was for everyone's good." She swallowed. "He said if we used them consistently, there wouldn't be incidents. Magical ones." "And you were afraid of magical incidents," Harry said. "I was afraid of," she stopped. She started again. "He was very persuasive. He seemed like he knew exactly what he was doing. He seemed like he knew everything." She looked at Harry finally, and her face was complicated in ways Harry didn't have the vocabulary for yet. "I was 23 years old and I had just been told my sister was dead and they were leaving her son on my doorstep and I had no idea what to do with any of it." Harry looked at her. He thought about 23 and terrified and being handed a problem by someone who seemed like he had all the answers. He thought, that's how it works. That's how it always works. Give someone a problem they're afraid of and then offer them the solution. Then you own both the problem and the person. "I'm not angry at you," Harry said. And he meant it, which surprised him slightly. The anger was there, it was absolutely there, but it was oriented correctly. It knew where to point. Petunia looked at him with an expression he couldn't read entirely, and then the cupboard door opened and Sharpfang stepped out carrying a sealed evidence bag containing what appeared to be a small, embroidered sachet of dried lavender. "Positive for 17 distinct potions compounds," Sharpfang said, to Harry, professionally. "The sachet has an active diffusion charm that releases trace quantities into the immediate atmosphere. Exposure requires only proximity, not consumption." He looked at the bag with an expression that managed to be clinical and profoundly offended at the same time. "The charm's signature can be traced to the caster. Analysis will take 48 hours. But you'll know who cast it," Harry said. "We will know who cast it," Sharpfang confirmed. In the hallway, Petunia made a small sound and sat down abruptly on the bottom stair, and Vernon, who had come out of the sitting room at some point, stood over her looking for once not red-faced and blustering but simply bewildered, as though someone had moved all the furniture in a room he'd lived in for years. Harry looked at the evidence bag. He looked at the cupboard. "Right," he said. "Let's go." Back at Gringotts, the afternoon moved into evening, and the meeting room accumulated more paper and more clarity simultaneously. Augusta Longbottom had spent the afternoon making connections that Harry had begun but couldn't complete. She knew the Wizengamot, its procedures, its members, the internal alliances and personal histories and procedural landmines that would determine how the session played out. "Dumbledore has 12 reliable votes," she said, spreading a list across the table. "These are members who have been in his orbit for decades, people who genuinely believe he's acting in Wizarding Britain's best interests, people who owe him political favors, and 2 who I strongly suspect are under compulsions of their own, though that's a separate matter." She tapped 4 names at the bottom of the list. "These are genuinely undecided, they'll follow evidence. These," she indicated 7 more, "will be uncomfortable but persuadable. And these 4 will be actively opposed to any finding against Dumbledore regardless of evidence because their own positions depend on the existing power structure remaining intact." "And the rest?" Harry asked. "The rest will do what's right if it's made easy for them to do so," Augusta said. "People usually do the right thing when the cost of doing otherwise is clearly articulated." She looked at Harry across the table. "You understand you'll be speaking tomorrow? In the chamber. To all of them?" "Yes," Harry said. "You're 7. I know. Half of them will dismiss you on sight. They'll hear you talk and think, how charming, a child who's been coached, and they'll apply that filter to everything you say. Then I need to say something they can't filter, Harry said. He'd been thinking about this since Ragnar's note had arrived. Not arguments they can pick apart. Facts. Numbers. Documents. He looked at the evidence laid out across the table. Every withdrawal from the vault, with the signature and date. Every potion's compound, with the clinical testimony. The will, naming Sirius Black as guardian. The evidence that there was no trial. He paused. The sachet. When do we have the caster identification? Tomorrow morning, Sharpfang said. The analysis will be complete by 7. Good. Harry looked at Augusta. You asked what I needed. What do you need? For your part of the session? Augusta looked at him with that cliff-edge expression that wasn't unkind. She was quiet for a moment, recalibrating something. Procedural backing, she said finally. I'll move to have the session conducted under formal evidentiary rules rather than general debate, which means claims have to be supported and can't just be asserted. Under general debate, Dumbledore could simply speak and be believed because he's Dumbledore. Under formal evidentiary rules, every assertion requires documentation. She paused. I need 3 seconds for the motion. I have 2. My colleague Griselda Marchbanks will be the second. I need a third. Who? Harry asked. Tiberius Ogden is considering it. He was uncomfortable with the Black situation from the beginning but didn't push it because he had no grounds. This brief gives him grounds. She looked at Ragnar. He may need to hear from Gringotts directly about the vault documentation. I can make myself available for a brief communication this evening, Ragnar said, in the tone of someone who has already decided to do this and is merely formalizing the decision. Augusta nodded. She began packing the documents into an organized stack. Then she stopped, hands flat on the papers, and looked at Harry. I want to ask you something, she said. You don't have to answer. Harry waited. When you found out, all of this, in the ritual room, what did you feel? Harry thought about this honestly. The second it started coming out, he said, I mostly felt like things were making sense. The whole life I've had, the way it's been, it always felt wrong, but it felt wrong the way things feel wrong when you can't find the reason. When the reason turned up, it was almost a relief. He paused. The anger came later. It came after. And now? Now it's useful, Harry said. The anger. He looked at her steadily. I'm not going to stand up in that chamber and be upset, if that's what you're worried about. I'm going to go in there and tell the truth and let the documents do the rest. Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a long moment. Your mother, she said, was one of the most brilliant people I ever met. I met her twice, briefly, at ministry functions during the First War. I remember thinking both times that she saw through everything, all the political theater, all the posturing, and that she was utterly unimpressed by people who expected her to be impressed. She picked up the documents. I see the resemblance. Harry didn't say anything. Something in his chest did something complicated that he set aside for later, for a moment when he was alone and had the privacy to feel it properly. What about Dumbledore himself? Ragnar asked carefully. At the session, he will be there. He will speak. He will, the director chose his words with precision. He will present a perspective on his actions that he has presumably been prepared to present, consciously or not, for a very long time. He is extraordinarily persuasive. He has spent decades being the most trusted figure in wizarding Britain. I know, Harry said. He will not necessarily be hostile, Ragnar continued. He may present his actions as having been for your benefit. He may be genuinely convinced of that. I know, Harry said again. He thought about the potions and the vault and the will and the cupboard and the blanket with the lavender sachet, and he thought about a man who was brilliant and confident and beloved, who had decided that his vision of the right outcome was so certainly correct that other people's choices and rights and lives were simply variables to be managed in the service of that vision. He thought, the most dangerous people are always the ones who believe they're the heroes of the story. That's not going to change what the documents say, Harry said. He can believe whatever he likes. The ledgers don't care what he believes. Ragnarok looked at him for a long, quiet moment. No, the director of Gringotts said, with the satisfaction of someone who has always known this and is glad to hear it acknowledged. They don't. That night, back in the spare room on Privet Drive, Harry sat on the real bed with the real window and laid out everything he knew in order, methodically, the way his father had apparently laid out estate instructions in order, methodically, trusting the mechanism to run cleanly if the initial conditions were right. He thought about what Augusta had said, say something they can't filter. He thought about Ragnarok's warning about Dumbledore's persuasiveness. He thought about the 12 reliable votes and the 4 immovable ones and the 7 persuadable ones and the 4 who would follow evidence. He thought about what Dumbledore would say. Not the specifics, he didn't know those yet, but the shape of it. He'd say Harry was kept safe. He'd say the choices were necessary. He'd invoke the war, the danger, the sacrifice. He'd construct a narrative in which every action had been protective, paternal, ultimately loving. And he would believe it, or something close to enough to believe it, because the alternative was facing what it actually was. Harry thought, he'll talk about the future. About prophecy, maybe. About the greater good. And Harry thought, that's fine. He can talk about the future. I'm going to talk about the past. Outside the window, the August night was warm and still. A moth was doing patient circles around the streetlight at the corner. Down the hall, the house settled and breathed. Harry closed his eyes and thought about his father's voice, not a voice he'd ever heard, not really, but the voice of the letter, the voice of someone who'd written just because you exist and you are ours, and he held that steady in his chest like an anchor. Tomorrow was the Wizengamot. He was ready. Chapter 3. The Wizengamot doesn't like surprises. The Ministry of Magic at 7 in the morning was a different animal than it was at 9. Harry stepped out of the visitor's entrance telephone box, Sharpfang beside him, Ragnarok behind, Augusta Longbottom already waiting in the atrium in full Wizengamot robes with the expression of someone who had been awake since 4 and had used the time productively. And the atrium was all marble and echo and the particular quality of empty that large government buildings have when the machinery of bureaucracy hasn't quite started turning yet. A security wizard behind the desk looked up at their entrance, saw Ragnarok, and very carefully looked back down at his paperwork. The analysis had come through at 6:47. Sharpfang had delivered it to Harry in the spare room on Privet Drive with the punctuality of a bank that understood deadlines. The charmed signature on the lavender sachet belonged to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Not ambiguously, not partially, cleanly, completely, with the specificity of a fingerprint. The report used the word conclusive 4 times in 2 paragraphs, which Harry suspected was unusual in forensic documents. He'd read it. He'd put it with the other documents in the leather folder Gringotts had provided. Then he'd had breakfast, gotten dressed in the cleanest clothes he owned, which were still Dudley's cast-offs and still too large, and come here. Augusta had looked at his clothes once when he arrived, said nothing, waved her wand, and suddenly everything fit precisely. Harry had looked down at himself, then at her. A child should not walk into the Wizengamot looking like he was dressed by people who resented having to do it, she said. Which, it appears, is exactly what happened. Harry didn't argue. Now they moved through the atrium toward the lifts, and the lift took them down to level 10, and the doors opened into a corridor that felt older than the rest of the ministry, stone rather than marble, torches rather than enchanted lights, the walls hung with tapestries in deep colors depicting scenes Harry didn't have time to study. The corridor ended in 2 enormous wooden doors, each one 10 feet tall, banded in iron, with the Wizengamot seal carved at eye level, a set of scales over a wand, surrounded by stars. 2 witches in the purple robes of Wizengamot officials stood outside the doors checking names against a list. They saw Augusta and stepped aside. They saw Ragnarok and nodded with careful respect. They saw Harry and stared. Harrison James Potter, Sharpfang said, precisely. Primary claimant in the brief of violation, admitted under Provision 14b. His attendance is on the director's notice. The witch with the list looked at it. She looked at Harry. She looked back at the list. She stepped aside. The doors opened. The Wizengamot chamber was a circle. That was the first thing, a wide, circular room with tiered seating rising in concentric rings, the way an amphitheater works, except facing inward rather than outward. At the center, a floor of pale stone with 2 chairs facing the raised bench of the chief warlock. The bench was already occupied. The seats in the tiered rings were filling, 50, 60, 70 robed figures settling into place, the sound of it a low productive murmur like a hive waking up. The robes were plum purple, and the chamber had the particular gravity of old institutional power, the kind that has been sitting in the same room making decisions for so long it has started to feel like geology. Harry took it all in as he walked to the central floor, and he didn't feel small exactly, but he was aware of being the smallest thing in the room and aware that this was by significant design. The architecture of this space was built to make the person at the center feel the weight of the institution bearing down on them from all sides. That was the point. You were meant to feel it. He found he didn't, particularly. He took the chair on the left. Sharpfang stood behind him with the leather document folder. Ragnarok moved to a separate designated position to the right of the central floor, which Sharpfang had explained was the traditional position for the filing party in a brief of violation, neutral ground, neither prosecution nor defense, simply the institution that had called the session. Augusta climbed to her seat in the tiered ranks, 3rd row, left side, and settled into it like someone returning to familiar territory. The chief warlock's bench. The man seated there was wearing robes more elaborate than anyone else's, layers of plum and silver, a chain of office, a hat Harry would have found comical in any other context. He had very blue eyes and a very long beard and a face that arranged itself, automatically, into an expression of benign authority, the way some faces arrange themselves into habitual smiles, not calculated exactly, just well practiced. Albus Dumbledore looked down at Harry Potter from the chief warlock's bench. Harry looked back. For a moment the room held that look between them, and it was the room that felt it, a ripple through the assembled witches and wizards, a collective intake of something not quite breath, the awareness of a thing that had been moving underground for a very long time finally breaking the surface. Dumbledore's expression was extraordinary. Harry had expected many things: authority, composure, the performance of authority. What he hadn't fully anticipated was the other thing in Dumbledore's face, the thing underneath the composure, genuine, unguarded emotion. Something that looked almost like relief, and something that looked almost like grief, and something that was neither and both and something else besides. He looked at Harry the way someone looks at a thing they've been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. He looked at Harry, Harry realized, like he knew him. Intimately. The way you look at someone you've been watching from a distance for a long time. Harry found this more unsettling than anything else that had happened so far. He set it aside. There were other things to do. Dumbledore called the session to order with a tap of his wand against the bench, and the chamber settled into a listening quiet. This emergency session of the Wizengamot is convened under Article 9 of the Gringotts Wizengamot Accord of 1489, at the formal filing of a brief of violation by Director Ragnarok of Gringotts Bank. His voice was measured, deep, carrying easily through the chamber without apparent effort. The brief concerns the estate of the late James Charles Potter, Lord of the ancient and noble house of Potter, and touches on the welfare of his minor heir, Harrison James Potter. He paused. Before we proceed, I wish to note for the record that the matters contained in this brief involve my own actions in the period following the events of October 31, 1981. In the interest of procedural transparency, I will not recuse myself from the chair, as the session was called under specific provisions that require the Chief Warlock's presence. Point of order. Augusta Longbottom was on her feet. She said it cleanly, without drama, in the tone of someone who has been waiting precisely for this moment and has timed it correctly. The chair acknowledges Lady Longbottom, Dumbledore said, smoothly. I move that this session be conducted under formal evidentiary rules rather than general debate procedure, Augusta said. Seconded by Griselda Marchbanks. From the far right of the tiered seating, an older witch with sharp eyes lifted her hand in confirmation. A beat of silence. The chamber was watching Dumbledore. The motion requires a third second under the formal procedure, Dumbledore said. Still smooth. Still measured. Still the composed authority that had sat in this chair for decades. Tiberius Ogden, said a gravelled voice from the upper tiers, and a broad-shouldered older wizard raised his hand without looking away from the Chief Warlock's bench. Thirded. Something moved through the chamber, not audible, but present. A shift in atmosphere, the kind you feel before weather changes. Several of the assembled witches and wizards were looking at each other. Several were looking at Harry. Several were looking at Dumbledore with expressions that were carefully neutral in the way that careful neutrality is itself a position. Dumbledore held the silence for exactly the right number of seconds, not long enough to seem stalling, just long enough to maintain composure. The motion carries, he said. This session will proceed under formal evidentiary rules. All claims require documentary or testimonial support. He looked out at the chamber with the benign gravity of someone who is absolutely certain they can navigate whatever is about to happen. Director Ragnarok, you may present the brief. Ragnarok presented the brief with the economy and precision of someone who had been doing this for a very long time and had decided, for this particular brief, to leave nothing soft in it. He laid out the vault withdrawals first, the dates, the amounts, the signatures, the stated justifications, the absence of any legal guardianship documentation to support the proxy authority claimed. He spoke for 12 minutes without notes, citing specific document numbers that Iron Teeth, who had appeared at some point to one side, quiet as furniture, confirmed with a raised ledger at each reference. When he finished the vaults section, he was not dramatic about it. He simply stated the total, 1.3 million galleons, in the same tone he'd used for everything else, and let the number do what numbers do. The chamber was very quiet. Dumbledore's expression had not moved. It had the quality of something sculpted, not frozen exactly, just very, very still. Ragnarok moved to the will section. He presented both wills, James Potter's and Lily Potter's, with their guardian designations, in order of preference, and the explicit prohibition against placement with Petunia Dursley. He noted the current guardianship arrangement, which had been in place for 6 years. He noted it without editorial comment. He didn't need one. Someone in the upper tiers made a sound that wasn't quite a word but had the shape of one. The brief further notes, Ragnarok said, that the primary named guardian, Sirius Orion Black, is currently held at Her Majesty's Prison Azkaban, with no record of formal trial, no ministry hearing record, no Wizengamot proceeding record, and no record of any legal representation being appointed. He has been held for 6 years without any of the procedural requirements of wizarding law being met. Now the chamber was not just quiet. It was the silence of people doing arithmetic they don't like the answer to. The brief further presents forensic evidence of 52 active potions compounds detected in the bloodstream of Harrison James Potter during a mandatory Gringotts inheritance ritual conducted on July 31st of this year. Ragnarok reached into the folder Sharpfang brought forward and placed a document on the central floor in front of him, not dramatically, just deliberately. The compounds include substances classified as Category 1 magical crimes under the Magical Persons Protection Act of 1943. Among these compounds, a loyalty compulsion keyed to a specific individual. A submission variant of the same compound. A diminishment compound suppressing core development. A fate-binding tincture. He paused. The fate-binding tincture is illegal under 6 separate statutes and 2 international treaties. It has not been legally used in Wizarding Britain since 1889. Its purpose is to bind the emotional and magical fate of the recipient to a specific outcome or person, limiting the recipient's capacity to make choices outside the parameters defined by whoever administered the tincture. He placed a second document on the floor. Forensic analysis of a charm-embedded object recovered from the property of Petunia Desley, No. 4 Privet Drive, Surrey, where Harrison James Potter has resided for 6 years, confirms that the charm responsible for the environmental diffusion of 17 of these 52 compounds, including the loyalty compulsion and the diminishment compound, bears the magical signature of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He placed the forensic report on the floor. He stepped back. Gringotts presents these findings and requests the Wizengamot's formal response under Article 9 procedures, Ragnarok said. I yield the floor. The chamber erupted. Not chaos, it was a Wizengamot, and these were people with decades of training in institutional decorum, but the controlled eruption of a formally repressed space where everyone has suddenly decided they need to speak at once. Dumbledore let it run for approximately 15 seconds, watching it with his sculpted expression, then tapped his wand against the bench once, sharply, and the noise subsided. The chair will take contributions in order, Dumbledore said. I will address the brief's findings directly before we proceed to questions. He looked out at the chamber with the full weight of Albus Dumbledore, 80 years of service, the wizarding world's defeat of Grindelwald, the Order of Merlin, the trust of a generation, all of it present in the room the way weather is present, felt before seen. The actions described in the brief were undertaken by me in the immediate aftermath of one of the darkest periods in our history. The wizarding world had just survived Voldemort, several people flinched. Several more went rigid. And the immediate priority was ensuring that Harrison Potter survived to fulfill his role in our world's ongoing protection. The financial arrangements made with the Potter Trust were informal but were undertaken with the full intention of serving that protective purpose. The guardianship placement, while not strictly in accordance with the will's specifications, was made on the basis of a magical protection that I believed, and continue to believe, was essential to Harry's survival. He paused, and when he continued his voice dropped into a register that was genuinely, deeply sincere. Every choice I made was made to protect this child. Every choice. Harry let him finish. Then he stood up. Dumbledore looked at him. The chamber looked at him. Hundreds of eyes. Permission to address the session, Harry said, to Dumbledore, correctly and crisply. A beat. Dumbledore could not refuse it. The formal evidentiary rules Augusta had pushed through meant Harry's provision 14b, standing was absolute. Granted, Dumbledore said, in a tone that was still warm, still composed, with something underneath it that might have been the faintest current of something else. Harry walked to the center of the floor. He stood on the pale stone and looked up at the tiered seats, at 50, 60, 70 faces looking back at him, and he thought about what Augusta had told him, half of them will hear a child who's been coached. He thought about his father's letter and Ragnarok's iron eyes and the forensic report sitting on the floor 3 feet away. He didn't use notes. He didn't need them. Director Ragnarok presented the vault withdrawals, Harry said, in a clear, carrying voice that surprised several people in the front rows, based on their expressions. 1.3 million galleons. The stated justification on every proxy authority form is ongoing care and welfare provisions for my benefit. He paused. I lived in a cupboard. For 6 years. Under the stairs. The door locked from the outside. He looked at the chamber without heat in it, just the fact, clean and bare. I would like someone to explain to me what that money was providing, because it wasn't food. I ate what was left after my cousin finished, mostly, and it wasn't clothing, I'm wearing his cast-offs, and it wasn't education, or medical care, or anything else you'd normally put in the category of ongoing care and welfare. He paused again. I'm 7. I'll accept that I might be missing something. What was it providing? The silence in the chamber was absolute. The wills, Harry continued. Both of my parents' wills named Sirius Black as my primary guardian. My mother's will explicitly prohibited placement with my aunt. Both wills were filed with Gringotts on the day they were written, which means they were legally valid, legally binding, and legally available to anyone with the authority to access them. He looked at Dumbledore directly. You had that authority. You had it because you were the executor named in my father's estate instructions, which means you read the will. You knew Sirius Black was the named guardian. You knew the prohibition on my aunt's household. And you placed me there anyway. He let that sit for a moment. Not because you didn't know. Because you chose differently. Dumbledore's expression had shifted slightly. Still composed, but something underneath the composure was working now, the machinery of a very intelligent mind processing how to respond to something that doesn't leave a gap for rhetoric. The potions, Harry said. He walked to the forensic report and picked it up and held it. 52 active compounds. The fate-binding tincture is the one I want to talk about specifically, because Director Ragnarok explained what it does and I think people in this room should hear it described clearly. He looked up at the chamber. A fate-binding tincture limits the recipient's capacity to make choices outside the parameters defined by whoever administered it. It doesn't just affect loyalty or mood, it narrows the range of futures the person can perceive as possible. It doesn't force specific choices. It makes certain choices feel inconceivable. He lowered the report. Someone gave me a potion designed to make it impossible for me to fully imagine my own freedom. They gave it to me as a baby. They renewed it for 6 years. He held up the forensic report. This document says the charm that delivered these compounds was cast by Albus Dumbledore. He set the report down on the floor. He looked at Dumbledore. You said every choice was made to protect me, Harry said. The vault withdrawals. The guardianship placement. The potions. His voice was even, completely even, the voice of someone who has decided that the truth is a more powerful instrument than anger. I'm not going to argue about your intentions. I can't know what you intended. What I know is what happened. And what I know is that for 6 years, I was kept in conditions my parents' wills explicitly prohibited, under the influence of 52 potions I didn't consent to, while my trust vault was drained by quarterly withdrawals and my godfather sat in Azkaban without a trial. He looked at the old man at the bench, looked at him steadily, without theater and without flinching. Those are the things that happened. In the real world. To a real person. To me. He spread his hands slightly. The documents are on the floor. The Wizengamot can read them. He sat down. The chamber had a quality to it now that Harry had never experienced before but recognized instinctively, the quality of a room in which something has just become permanently and irreversibly clear. Like a fog lifting. Like a lock opening. Several people were looking at Dumbledore. Several were looking at the documents on the floor. Several were looking at Harry with expressions that ran the spectrum from shock to something rawer and more complicated. Augusta Longbottom was looking at the ceiling, which Harry thought meant she was doing the very controlled breathing of someone who is satisfied and is managing to keep that satisfaction appropriately contained. Dumbledore spoke. He spoke for 20 minutes, and it was, Harry had to acknowledge, extraordinary. Not because it was manipulative, or not only because of that. Because it was genuine. That was the thing that made it extraordinary and made it terrible in equal measure. Dumbledore believed. He stood in that chamber as the chief warlock and as an old man and as someone who had spent a lifetime carrying the weight of things he decided only he could carry, and he explained his actions with the clarity of someone for whom the logic had always been airtight. He talked about the prophecy. He talked about Voldemort's likely return. He talked about the magical protection Lily Potter's sacrifice had generated, a real protection, a genuine one, anchored in Petunia's household by blood, and he explained why that protection had required Harry to remain there, why removing him would have severed it, why the risk had been too great. He talked about Sirius Black with evident pain, said that in the immediate chaos of that night, with multiple credible witnesses claiming Black's guilt and Black himself offering no defense, the decision to leave him in ministry hands had seemed the lesser of available evils, and that the absence of a formal trial was a ministry failure he had not sufficiently pushed back against, which he acknowledged as an error. He talked about the vault withdrawals and said they had been used for legitimate security operations, unnamed, unspecified, for reasons he could not yet fully disclose, and that every galleon had gone toward the same protective mission. He talked about the potions and he talked about them last, and this was where the composure came under the most visible strain, and this was where Harry listened most carefully. Dumbledore said the loyalty compulsion and the diminishment compound had been administered with a specific purpose, to prevent Harry from developing his abilities too rapidly, in an uncontrolled environment, before he was ready to understand and manage them. He said a child of Harry's power, growing up without magical guidance or community, could have caused catastrophic harm to himself or others. He said the fate-binding tincture. He paused on this one. The pause was notable. It was the first time the composure fully cracked open, just briefly, just for a moment, and what was visible underneath was something Harry hadn't expected. Not guilt. Not defensiveness. Exhaustion. The fate-binding tincture, Dumbledore said, was administered to keep Harry tethered to a path that I continue to believe, leads to the only possible defeat of Voldemort. It was not designed to harm him. It was designed to preserve a specific sequence of events that my research indicated was the only viable path to our world's safety. He looked at Harry, and the blue eyes were full of something genuine and enormous and completely, fundamentally blind to itself. I know this is difficult to hear. I know it seems, Chief Warlock. Augusta Longbottom was on her feet. Her voice cut through the chamber the way a blade cuts, clean, no wasted motion. I have a question for the chamber. Lady Longbottom. The fate-binding tincture, Augusta said, is illegal. Not slightly illegal. Not technically illegal. Categorically, absolutely, comprehensively illegal under 6 statutes and 2 international treaties, which Director Ragnarok named in his presentation. She looked out at the chamber with the controlled fire of someone who has been waiting 30 years to say something and is now choosing every word with surgical precision. I have sat in this chamber for 30 years. In that time I have heard the argument that exceptional circumstances justify exceptional measures. I have heard it applied to justify surveillance without warrant, detention without trial, and interference in private lives that would not be tolerated in any other context. The argument always sounds the same. The threat is real. The cause is just. The person making the decision is wise enough to be trusted with the exception. She paused. Today we have a child sitting in that chair who is 7 years old, who has a fate-binding tincture in his bloodstream because one man decided, alone, without oversight or accountability, that this child's future had to be managed. That this child's capacity to imagine his own freedom had to be chemically limited. For the greater good. Her voice stayed perfectly level. I want to know how many members of this chamber consider that to be the action of a man who should continue to hold the position of Chief Warlock. The chamber exploded again. This time Dumbledore let it run longer before calling order. In the noise and the rising of voices, Harry sat very still in his chair and watched Dumbledore manage the chamber, watched him read the room, assess the damage, decide what was salvageable and what was not, and for a moment, despite everything, despite the vault and the potions and the cupboard and all of it, Harry felt something that surprised him. A complicated, unwilling respect. Not for what Dumbledore had done. Never that. But for the mind doing the damage assessment, the speed and precision of it, the way he turned to each emerging problem with the fluency of someone who had been navigating political complexity for decades. A mind that was genuinely exceptional, genuinely devoted to something it believed in, that had decided its devotion gave it the right to make choices for other people. A mind that was brilliant and loving and completely, catastrophically wrong. Harry thought, I understand you better than you think I do. And that's not a comfort, that's a warning. The formal questioning lasted 3 hours. Dumbledore answered every question. Not evasively, not with deflection, he answered directly, fully, in the manner of someone who has decided that the best available strategy is complete transparency, because complete transparency is still under his control and incomplete answers are not. He acknowledged the vault withdrawals. He acknowledged the guardianship placement. He acknowledged the potions, every single one, with the stated purpose of each. He acknowledged the fate-binding tincture with the measured, grave tone of someone admitting an action they defend but recognize will not be defensible to others. He did not acknowledge wrongdoing in any of it. Every answer was framed as choice, considered choice, difficult choice, choice made by someone bearing a burden of knowledge others did not have. Several Wizengamot members were clearly moved by this, the ones Augusta had called his reliable votes, who sat with their faces doing the work of people trying to reconcile what they know of a man with what the documents are saying. Harry watched them and understood them. Dumbledore had been the fixed point of their world for decades. It was genuinely hard to give that up. The persuadable ones were shifting. Harry could see it, the careful, non-committal faces of people doing political mathematics, weighing the cost of standing with Dumbledore against the cost of standing with a 7-year-old who had just articulated 52 potions compounds from memory without a single note. At the 2-hour mark, Ogden, the broad-shouldered wizard from the upper tiers, asked the question that changed the temperature of the room definitively. Chief Warlock, Ogden said, in a voice that made no pretense at neutrality. The fate-binding tincture. You say it was administered to preserve a specific sequence of events. Can you tell this chamber what that sequence is? What is the outcome you were binding this child to? Dumbledore looked at him. I cannot disclose that information at this time. The nature of the threat, you administered an illegal compound to a minor child, Ogden said, with the patient implacability of someone who is not going to be moved, to bind him to an outcome you have not disclosed, for reasons you are not willing to explain. And you are asking this chamber to accept that on your word. He looked out at the assembled members. I have known Albus Dumbledore for 40 years. I have respected him for most of that time. But I want someone to explain to me how trust me is a sufficient answer when the question is why a child had a fate-binding tincture in his blood. The silence that followed this was definitive. Harry stood up. I have one more thing to add to the evidentiary record, he said. Dumbledore looked at him. Mr. Potter, under formal evidentiary rules, Harry said, pleasant and precise, I have provision 14b, standing on the floor until I yield it. A beat. Dumbledore inclined his head. Harry reached into the leather folder and produced the final document, the Gringotts accounting of projected full estate damages, calculated by the bank's senior actuaries, factoring in the withheld inheritance, the cost of the wrongful guardianship in terms of developmental harm, the projected value of the blocked core development over 6 years, and the legal damages applicable under the Magical Persons Protection Act for each of the 52 compounds at the statutory minimum per compound. Per year of administration. He placed it on the floor. The total figure is at the bottom of the last page, Harry said. Gringotts calculated it. Not me. He looked up at the chamber. I'm not telling you what to do with it. I'm just making sure it's in the record. He sat down. 3 people in the tiered seats turned to the last page of the document. One of them went slightly pale. The deliberation session was closed to Harry and Ragnarok, who waited in an anteroom with Sharpfang and Augusta, who had descended from the chamber after the questioning concluded and now sat in the anteroom's single comfortable chair with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the door. Well, she said, after a while. Well, Harry agreed. You told me you weren't going to be upset in there, she said. I wasn't. No, she said. You weren't. She looked at him with that cliff-edge expression. He'll keep the chair. For now. The votes aren't there to remove him today, too many of his people are still holding. But the brief stands. The formal finding will establish the vault withdrawals as unauthorized and order restitution. The potion's evidence will be referred to the DMLE for criminal investigation. The serious black matter will be ordered for immediate review. She paused. That's what today does. Today cracks the wall. What happens next depends on what the DMLE finds when they start pulling threads. And Dumbledore? Harry asked. Augusta considered this carefully. He's the most powerful man in this world. He has been for 40 years. Today you made that power visible to the people who've been standing in its shadow so long they forgot it was there. She paused. Visible power is manageable power. That's what today does. Harry thought about the exhaustion he'd seen in Dumbledore's face on the fate-binding tincture question. The crack in the composure. He thought, he's been carrying this for a very long time. And he's going to keep carrying it, because he doesn't know how to put it down. He thought, that's not my problem to solve. But it is going to keep being a problem. The door opened. Iron Teeth came through it with a sealed document. The Wizengamot's formal finding, he said, and held it out to Ragnok. Ragnok broke the seal. Read it. His expression moved through something that was, for a goblin, pronounced. Vault restitution ordered, he read. Full amount plus compound interest. Guardianship arrangement to be reviewed immediately under Ministry Family Services. Serious black case referred for emergency tribunal review, to be scheduled within 30 days. The DMLE is authorized to open a formal criminal investigation into the administration of controlled potions compounds to a minor. He lowered the document. The fate-binding tincture will be the subject of a special inquiry. He looked at Harry. The inquiry will be led by Ogden. Harry let out a slow breath. Not satisfaction exactly. Something more structural than that, the feeling of a foundation being poured, of something that will hold weight being put in place. The wall cracked, he said, to Augusta. The wall cracked, she confirmed. Outside the anteroom, somewhere in the ministry's marble corridors, people were going to be making calls and sending owls and gathering in clusters to process what had just happened in that chamber. The Wizengamot's formal finding would be on every desk in the building by end of day. By tomorrow it would be in whatever passed for news in the wizarding world. In 2 days, everyone in Britain who followed magical affairs would know. Harry thought about the vault restitution. He thought about the guardianship review. He thought about the 30-day window on Sirius Black's emergency tribunal. 30 days. He had 30 days to make sure it went right. He thought about what Ragnok had said. Gringotts presents these findings and requests the Wizengamot's formal response. He looked at the director of Gringotts. What do we know about Peter Pettigrew? Harry asked. Ragnok looked at him steadily. Now that, the director said, is the right question. Chapter 4, Loose Threads. The name Peter Pettigrew appeared in the Potter estate files exactly twice. The first time was in a letter James Potter had written to his Gringotts account manager in September 1981, 6 weeks before Godric's Hollow, making a minor adjustment to a property management clause. The letter was unremarkable except for a postscript, added in a different ink, slightly smeared, as though written in a hurry. P.S. If anything happens to us, look into what Sirius says about Peter. He'll know what I mean. The second time was in a ministry record Ragnok had obtained as part of the brief preparation. An arrest report, dated November 2, 1981, the day after Godric's Hollow, recording the arrest of Sirius Orion Black for the murder of 12 Muggles and 1 Peter Pettigrew on a street in Manchester. The report listed Pettigrew's remains as a single finger, recovered at the scene. Harry read both documents in the meeting room at Gringotts, the morning after the Wizengamot session, with Ragnok sitting across from him and Sharpfang standing at the window. A finger, Harry said. 1 finger, Ragnok confirmed. And they decided that was enough to confirm he was dead. It was enough to close the file. Harry looked at the arrest report. The arresting officer was listed, a young Auror named Dawlish, apparently fresh out of training. The supervising officer who signed off on the file closure was listed as Bartemius Crouch Sr., head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. 12 muggles dead, Harry said. One finger. And Sirius Black laughing. That's what the report says, that he was laughing when they arrested him. Yes, Ragnox said. Harry thought about this. He'd been thinking about it since the previous afternoon, when he'd asked Ragnox about Pettigrew, and Ragnox had said that's the right question, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has already been pulling the same thread and wants to see how far the person across from them will follow it. People don't laugh when they've just murdered someone, Harry said. Unless there's something wrong with them. But Sirius Black was described by everyone who knew him as, what? Loyal. Honorable. My father's best friend. My godfather. He paused. People don't laugh when they've just killed their best friend's family. But they might laugh when they realize they've been completely outmaneuvered by someone they trusted. When they realize what just happened. That kind of laughing. He looked at Ragnox. Where's Pettigrew? Ragnox's expression did something deliberate. Officially, dead. Interred in the record as deceased, November 2, 1981, Manchester. He paused. Gringotts maintains inheritance records for all registered wizarding families. The Pettigrew family account, a modest one, but existing, has not been transferred to a secondary beneficiary. It has simply been dormant. He paused again, with the timing of someone who has been patient about a reveal and is now allowing himself the small professional satisfaction of it. Dormant accounts are reviewed every 10 years for abandoned vault protocols. The last review was 1985. At that review, the account showed no activity, but the magical signature on the account had been refreshed. Harry put the document down. He's alive, Harry said. And he touched something connected to his vault. The magical signature refresh is automatic when the account holder's magical presence is within a certain proximity of a Gringotts-affiliated object, Sharpfong said from the window. The proximity range is approximately half a mile. The location of the refresh was, he checked his notes. Ottery St. Catchpole, Devon. Harry was quiet for a moment. So Peter Pettigrew is alive, he said. Which means the people he was allegedly murdered by, the 12 muggles in Manchester, were killed by someone else, or by an explosion, and Pettigrew staged his own death and framed Sirius Black for killing him. He looked at Ragnox. And Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 6 years for a murder that didn't happen. That is the logical conclusion of the evidence, Ragnox said carefully. Gringotts cannot make that determination formally, that requires the Ministry's investigation. What we can present is the vault signature evidence, the absence of a proper death record in the Wizarding Registry, and your father's letter, which suggests Black himself suspected Pettigrew's involvement in something significant. The real secret keeper, Harry said. Ragnox was very still. My parents used the Fidelius charm, Harry said. He'd found this in the Blue Wizarding Law book, in the section on protective enchantments, and had tracked it through 2 other sources Ragnox had provided at his request. The charm requires a secret keeper. Everyone thought it was Sirius. But if Sirius is innocent, if he didn't betray my parents, then someone else was the actual secret keeper. He looked at the documents. Pettigrew. They switched. Sirius wasn't the secret keeper. Pettigrew was. He paused. And then Pettigrew told Voldemort. The room held this. If that is accurate, Ragnox said slowly, then Peter Pettigrew is not merely alive. He is one of the primary perpetrators of the events of October 31, 1981. He is the reason your parents are dead. Harry looked at the arrest report. He looked at the single word, laughing. He thought about a man who has just realized that the person he trusted most has destroyed everything he loved, and that he has been left holding the evidence, and that in about 30 seconds the Aurors are going to arrive and it is already too late to explain anything. He thought about what that realization produces in a person. He thought about laughing because there is nothing else left. We need to find him, Harry said. Before the Sirius tribunal. If Pettigrew is alive and we can produce him, the tribunal isn't about reasonable doubt or procedural failures. It's about the truth. Ragnarok leaned back in his chair. Gringotts can provide the vault signature data to the DMLE. If the investigation team is competent and motivated, they can work outward from Ottery St. Catchpole. Are they competent and motivated? Ragnarok's expression was eloquent. Harry thought about this. Augusta, he said. Lady Longbottom, Ragnarok agreed, with the tone of someone confirming a correct answer. Augusta Longbottom received Harry's owl at breakfast, which he knew because she arrived at number 4 Privet Drive at 10 o'clock with the velocity of someone who had read it, decided, and acted without intermediate steps, and the expression of someone who had been wanting an excuse to do exactly this for some time. Petunia opened the door, took one look at Augusta in full robes with the Longbottom crest on her collar, and stepped back so fast she nearly tripped on the hall rug. "Where is the boy?" Augusta said. Not rudely, but with the economy of someone who doesn't have time for a preface. "Kitchen," Petunia managed. Augusta came through the house like weather, not loud, not disruptive, just entirely present and impossible to ignore. She appeared in the kitchen doorway and found Harry at the table with the blue wizarding law book, a borrowed copy of Magical Legal Procedures, a practitioner's guide that Ragnarok had sent over, and a list of notes written in his own hand on the back of an envelope. She looked at the books. She looked at the notes. She sat down across from him without being invited, because she was Augusta Longbottom, and sitting down without being invited was entirely consistent with her relationship to the world. "Pettigrew," she said. "Alive," Harry said. "Ottery St. Catchpole. Gringotts has the vault signature data." Augusta was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, "Amelia Bones." "Who?" "Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She took the post 8 months ago. Her predecessor, Crouch, is no longer in the picture." Augusta's voice had a precise quality on Crouch's name that suggested a separate and extensive opinion being deliberately set aside for efficiency. "Bones is honest. More importantly, she is stubborn. She does not overlook things she has noticed, and she does not let people tell her what she should or shouldn't have noticed." She looked at Harry. She was deeply uncomfortable with the black situation when she came into post. She reviewed the file as a matter of due diligence and found it, I'm told, remarkably thin. "She hasn't done anything about it," Harry said. "She had no mechanism," Augusta said. "The file is closed. Without new evidence, she cannot reopen it unilaterally. There are procedures, political obstacles, people with interests in the current version of events remaining the current version." She paused. "You have just provided her with new evidence. Specifically, a Gringotts vault signature placing a supposedly dead man in Devon in 1985. That is not procedurally ignorable. Will she move on it? If I bring it to her personally, with the Gringotts documentation, before lunch today," Augusta paused and looked at the clock on the Desley's kitchen wall, a large ugly thing shaped like a sunflower that Harry had always disliked. "Yes. She'll move on it. The tribunal is in 30 days. 29, Augusta corrected. I counted last night." She stood. "I need the Gringotts documents." Harry slid a folder across the table. He'd had it ready since 8 in the morning. Augusta looked at it. She looked at him. "You prepared this before I arrived." "I prepared it before I sent the owl," Harry said. "I thought you'd want to move fast." Augusta Longbottom picked up the folder. She looked at Harry with her cliff-edge expression, and this time there was something in it that was unambiguously warm, though it was the warmth of someone who keeps their warmth in a very controlled container. "Your father," she said, "was a good man. Occasionally maddening. Often too charming for his own good. But a good man." She tucked the folder under her arm. "You have more of your mother in you. She was better than charming. She was right." She moved toward the door. I'll send word when Bones has the file. Keep that law book, the section on emergency tribunal procedures in Chapter 12 will be useful. She left. Petunia appeared in the kitchen doorway 30 seconds later, watching the front door close, with an expression that had something in it Harry hadn't seen on his aunt's face before. It took him a moment to identify it. Reassessment. The days that followed moved fast and purposefully. 3 days after Augusta's visit, an owl arrived from the ministry, official seal, Amelia Bones' signature, confirming that the DMLE had opened a formal investigation into the death record discrepancy for Peter Pettigrew, and that a team had been dispatched to Devon. Harry read it twice and put it in the folder that was getting thicker every day, organized by date and category, sitting on the desk in the spare room that was starting to feel like an actual room rather than a provisional arrangement. The spare room had changed since July 31st in ways that were hard to articulate exactly. It wasn't that Harry had decorated it, he hadn't, really. But things had arranged themselves in it according to his actual preferences, and his actual preferences turned out to include books stacked by subject, a clear desk surface with good light, the window open whenever the weather permitted because the sound of the garden was better than silence, and absolutely no clutter, because clutter was the enemy of clear thinking and clear thinking was currently his primary resource. The legal emancipation petition had been filed the day after the Wizengamot session, on Ragnarok's advice and with Augusta's countersignature. It was working its way through the relevant office, which Ragnarok estimated would take 10 to 14 days and which Harry tracked with patient attention. The petition cited the Gringotts estate claim confirmation, the evidence of undue harm under the previous guardianship arrangement. This section ran to 4 pages, and invoked Provision 14(b)'s Emancipation Clause, requesting full legal standing for Harry as the primary holder of the Potter estate. In the meantime, Ministry Family Services had arrived at Privet Drive on the second day after the session, 2 witches with clipboards and the careful, thorough attention of people who have been told a situation is significantly worse than the paperwork suggested and want to verify this. They had looked at the cupboard. They had looked at Harry. They had spoken with Petunia, who had answered every question in a flat, exhausted voice that carried no defensiveness, as though she had already worked through whatever self-justification she'd been maintaining and had arrived somewhere on the other side of it. The conclusion of the Family Services visit was that Harry would remain at Privet Drive temporarily, pending the completion of the emancipation petition and the Sirius Black Tribunal. The blood protection was real, and until alternative protective arrangements were confirmed, the ministry's own assessors had agreed with Dumbledore's original reasoning on that specific point. Harry had read their conclusion and thought, fine. I'm not here because I have to be afraid. I'm here because it's currently the most useful place to be. There was a difference. It was an important difference. On the 7th day after the Wizengamot session, while Harry was in the garden doing his thinking with his hands work, the magic that had been quietly reorganizing itself since the cleansing did something it hadn't done before. He was thinking about the vault records, specifically about a line in the estate documents that had been nagging at him, a reference to Potter family properties listed as held in trust pending primary claimant majority, when the thought crystallized, and at the exact moment it crystallized, every weed in the rose bed pulled itself out of the soil simultaneously and arranged itself in a neat pile beside the path. Harry looked at the pile. He looked at his hands, which were in his pockets. He hadn't moved. He thought, experimentally, about the garden needing water. The garden was fine, it had rained yesterday. Nothing happened. He thought about the pile of weeds needing to move to the compost bin at the end of the garden. The pile shifted slightly, like something considering the suggestion. He watched it for a moment. Interesting, he said to nobody, and went inside to look at the estate documents again. The properties listed were more extensive than he'd absorbed during the initial ritual documentation. The Potter family had been wealthy for generations, not ostentatiously, not in the Malfoy manner of wealth as display, but in the quiet, compounded way of old families who had held property and invested well across centuries. The primary holdings were a manor in Godric's Hollow, which he knew was destroyed, and the Potter family seat in the Welsh borders, a property called Linwood that the estate records described as intact, maintained under standing preservation charms, awaiting primary claimant. There was a London property near Diagon Alley. 3 vault accounts beyond the trust vault. A collection of rare magical artifacts under storage, catalogued and sealed. And, listed at the bottom of the property inventory, a section Harry had initially passed over because it was phrased in the formal language that all the documents used and had blended in, Black family-affiliated properties and holdings, held in trust under the secondary inheritance provision of the Sirius Orain Black estate, transferable to primary claimant upon confirmation of heir status, conditional on Black estate resolution. Harry read it twice. Then he found Ragnar's direct owl address, which the director had provided for exactly these moments, and wrote a short note, "The Black estate secondary inheritance provision, can you explain what this means in plain language? And what happens to it if Sirius Black is released and formally exonerated?" He sent it and went back to chapter 12. Ragnar's reply came at 7 the next morning, carried by the same enormous black owl, which had apparently been assigned to Harry's correspondence and had the territorial manner of something that considered this assignment permanent. The reply was 3 pages long and characteristically precise. The secondary inheritance provision, Ragnar explained, was a standard protective clause in old family estate arrangements. Sirius Black, as the last male heir of the Black family, held the Black estate, Grimmauld Place, the Black family vaults, several additional properties, and a collection of dark artifacts under ministry seal, in his own right. However, because Sirius had been imprisoned without trial, the estate had been placed in a suspended state, neither transferred to a secondary heir nor freely accessible, pending resolution of his legal status. The secondary inheritance provision noted in Harry's estate documents referred to a bequest Sirius had made, before his imprisonment, naming Harry as his primary heir in the event of Sirius's death or permanent incapacitation. If Sirius Black is released and exonerated, Ragnar wrote, the Black estate reverts fully to him, and your status as his named heir is simply that, a future contingency rather than a current reality. He would be free to modify or revoke the bequest as he chooses. If, however, the tribunal determines that Sirius Black was wrongfully imprisoned, the period of wrongful imprisonment may be classified under magical law as a form of forced incapacitation, which would trigger a separate set of estate provisions. I will not speculate further on this as the legal question is contingent on the tribunal's specific findings. I would note, the letter concluded, that your primary interest in the Black estate matter should be, and I suspect is, the welfare of your godfather rather than any financial consideration. I mention the estate provisions only for completeness. Harry smiled at this, just briefly, because Ragnar was right and also because Ragnar clearly knew he was right and had said it anyway. He wrote back, obviously. But knowing the full picture matters. Thank you. H. On the 10th day, the DMLE team found something in Devon. Augusta appeared at Privet Drive at 8:30 in the evening without an owl warning, which Harry was learning meant that something had happened faster than expected. She came through the door that Petunia opened with a now familiar combination of resignation and deference, and came into the kitchen where Harry was eating dinner, actually eating dinner now, at the table, a full portion, because the dietary management that had apparently been another layer of the control system had ended when the Ministry Family Services assessors had very firmly discussed meal provision with the Dursleys, and she sat down and said, "They found a rat." Harry put down his fork. "A magical rat," Augusta said. "In Ottery St. Catchpole. Belonging to a wizarding family named Weasley. A pet, apparently, family had it for 12 years, given to the eldest boy originally, passed down through the children." She paused. 12 years. Rats don't live 12 years. Animagus, Harry said. Unregistered, Augusta confirmed. The DMLE team used a Revelio on the rat as part of a general area sweep, standard procedure for locating an unregistered magical individual, and got a hit. She looked at Harry with an expression that was complex and controlled. The rat transformed when the Revelio activated. Apparently involuntary, the charm was strong enough to override the voluntary aspect of the transformation. She paused. Peter Pettigrew is currently in ministry custody. He is not well, physically, 12 years mostly as a rat will do that, but he is alive, coherent, and being processed for formal interrogation under Veritaserum. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of Vernon's television through the wall. Harry thought about a family with a rat they'd had for 12 years, passed from child to child, trusted, handled, part of the household. He thought about what it would mean to be that and to choose hiding over everything else, to choose the illusion of safety over honesty for 12 years. He thought about cowardice as a sustained, active practice. He thought about Sirius in Azkaban for those same 12 years. "When's the interrogation?" he said. "Tomorrow morning," Augusta said. "Bones is running it herself." She looked at him steadily. "The findings will be submitted to the tribunal committee immediately. Given the nature of the evidence, living witness, Veritaserum testimony, Bones believes she can push the tribunal date up significantly." "How significantly?" She said 2 weeks from today. "Possibly 10 days if the documentation moves quickly." 10 days. Harry thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban for 6 years for something he didn't do. He thought about what Azkaban was. He'd found a description in the legal procedures book, clinical and brief, that had nonetheless been sufficient to understand exactly what 6 years there would mean. Dementors. Reliving your worst memories in an endless loop, every day, without relief. 6 years of that, for something you didn't do, for a betrayal committed by someone you trusted. He thought, 10 days. Hold on 10 more days. He didn't say this out loud. He said, "What do we need to prepare for the tribunal?" Augusta looked at him with that warmth she kept in the controlled container. "You are not required to attend the tribunal," she said. "I know," Harry said. "It will be difficult. Seeing him, he will not be the person your parents knew. 6 years in Azkaban changes people fundamentally." "He may not be entirely, Augusta," Harry said. "What do we need to prepare?" She looked at him. She decided something. The tribunal will need the will documentation confirming Black as named guardian. The arrest report showing the absence of a trial. The Pettigrew Vault signature evidence. And, most importantly, Pettigrew's Veritaserum testimony, which Bones will present directly. She paused. "Your presence is not legally necessary, but it is, strategically significant. You are the person most directly affected by Sirius Black's wrongful imprisonment. Your presence in the room tells the tribunal something that documents cannot." "Then I'll be there," Harry said. Augusta nodded. She reached into her robes and produced a card, heavy cream stock, engraved, and slid it across the table. "That's Bones' direct address. She asked me to give it to you. She wants to speak with you before the tribunal, informally." Harry picked it up. He looked at it. She read the Wizengamot transcript. She read it 4 times, apparently, Augusta said, with something that was not quite a smile but occupied the same emotional territory. "She has a great many feelings about it that she is managing professionally." Harry put the card with his other documents. He met Amelia Bones 3 days later, in her office at the ministry, which was the tiddiest office Harry had seen in a building that had a mixed relationship with tidiness. She was a solid, square-shouldered witch with a monocle and a direct gaze that reminded Harry slightly of Ragnarok, the same quality of actually looking at you rather than at some constructed version of you. She shook his hand the way you shake the hand of someone you respect rather than someone you're humoring, which Harry noticed and filed. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Sit down." Harry sat. "I want to tell you what Pettigrew said under Veritaserum," she said, "before the tribunal, so that you hear it from me and in this context rather than in a public setting for the first time." She folded her hands on the desk. "He confirmed that he was the secret keeper for your parents' household, not Sirius Black. He confirmed that he voluntarily disclosed your parents' location to Voldemort. He confirmed that he staged his own death on November 2nd, deliberately killed 12 Muggles in the explosion, severed his own finger, and transformed before anyone could verify his death. She paused. He confirmed that Sirius Black was not involved in any way in the events of October 31, 1981. He confirmed that Sirius Black had no knowledge that Pettigrew was the secret keeper. Sirius Black was innocent. Harry held this. He also confirmed, Bones said carefully, that the decision to keep Sirius Black in Azkaban without trial was facilitated by the fact that no one in a position of authority pushed for a trial. Crouch, who was running the DMLE at the time, accepted the case summary without requesting formal proceedings. And, she paused. Pettigrew also confirmed, under Veritaserum, that he believes Dumbledore was aware that Black had not received a trial and chose not to intervene. The office was very still. Chose not to intervene, Harry said. That is Pettigrew's belief, Bones said precisely. It is not confirmed evidence. Pettigrew's knowledge of Dumbledore's internal decision-making is limited and cannot be verified independently. I am telling you because you should know all of it, not because I am treating it as established fact. She looked at him steadily. I want to ask you something. Directly. All right, Harry said. How are you doing, she said. Not strategically. Not legally. Actually. Harry looked at her. He thought about the question honestly, the way he thought about everything now, methodically, without performing an answer. I'm better than I was, he said. The cleansing helped. Having actual information helps. Doing something with the information helps. He paused. I'm angry. I think I'll probably be angry for a long time, and that's fine. The anger is pointed at the right things. I'm not frightened of any of this. He looked at her. I'm looking forward to meeting Sirius. That's the part that, he stopped. Bones waited. That's the part that's actually hard, Harry said. Not the Wizengamot. Not the legal process. The actual part is that there's someone out there who was supposed to be my family, who's been in Azkaban for 6 years, who doesn't know I'm doing any of this. And he's going to come out of that place and I'm going to be there and I don't. He stopped again. Organized the sentence. I don't know what that's going to be. I just know I want it to happen. Bones looked at him for a moment. Her expression was doing something careful and human that coexisted with the professional steadiness. He's being transferred to a ministry-holding facility from Azkaban next week, she said. Medical assessment, stabilization, preparation for the tribunal. He'll have proper food, a proper room, healers. She paused. He hasn't been told why yet. We didn't want to give him something to hope for until we were certain the tribunal would proceed. We're certain now. Another pause. He'll be told tomorrow. Harry nodded. He thought about Sirius Black being told tomorrow. He thought about what that news does to a person who has been in Azkaban for 6 years with nothing. Thank you, he said. For telling me. The tribunal is in 9 days, Bones said, returning to the practical with the ease of someone who uses work as a container for feeling without being consumed by it. I'll need your formal testimony, not oral, written, confirming your understanding of the will provisions and the guardianship situation. 4 paragraphs. Simple, factual. She picked up her quill. And I want you in the room, Mr. Potter. Not hidden, not at the back. At the front. I'll be there, Harry said. I know, she said. I just wanted to say it directly. She put the quill down. Your parents were good people. I knew them slightly, we were in the same order of the Phoenix during the First War. Your mother once corrected my Patronus technique, which I found mortifying at the time and have been grateful for ever since. She paused. I am glad this is happening. Harry looked at her. So am I, he said. The emancipation petition was granted on day 13, confirmed by Owl from the Ministry Family Court, signed by a magistrate Harry didn't know, stamped with enough official seals to be essentially self-explanatory. He read it at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and it said, in the formal language of institutional documents, that Harrison James Potter was granted full legal standing as a magically emancipated minor under the Magical Persons Act, in recognition of his established estate claim, the evidence presented regarding his previous guardianship arrangement, and the magistrate had added a handwritten note at the bottom, unusual enough that Harry suspected Augusta had had a word, the evident maturity and reasoning capacity demonstrated in proceedings to date. Harry put the document in the folder. He went upstairs and sat on the spare room bed and looked at the window. He was legally his own person now. Not in all the ways that mattered. He was still 7, still living at Privet Drive pending the tribunal outcome, still in some transitional state between the life that had been constructed for him and the life he was building. But on paper, in the eyes of the law, he was nobody's ward and nobody's project. He thought about the fate-binding tincture. He thought about a compound designed to make certain futures feel inconceivable. He thought about what it meant to choose, with the full knowledge of your own nature and your own resources, what came next. He thought about Linwood, the Potter family seat in the Welsh borders, intact, awaiting primary claimant. He thought about Hogwarts in 4 years, which was something he'd been holding in his mind with quiet attention since the vault documents had shown him his Hogwarts school account, already established, pre-funded, waiting. He thought about Sirius Black in 9 days. He thought about Dumbledore, who was still Chief Warlock, still headmaster of Hogwarts, still the fixed point of the wizarding world, a fixed point that now had a very visible crack running through it, but was still standing, still operating, still absolutely convinced that his vision was necessary and right. Harry thought, we're not done. Not remotely. But he also thought, the wall cracked. That's what this stage was for. Outside, the garden was doing something that gardens did in August, going abundantly, excessively green, overripe with summer, everything growing at once in the generative chaos that precedes September's organization. The weeds had come back in the rose bed, because weeds always came back. Harry went down to pull them. He was in the garden, kneeling in the soil, hands in the dirt, thinking about loose threads and how you followed them, not with impatience but with the steady, concentrated attention that finds the end of a thing before pulling, when the second owl of the day arrived. Not the black one. A different owl, smaller, plainly official, carrying a sealed ministry envelope with the DMLE seal. Harry opened it. 3 lines, Peter Pettigrew has formally confessed. Transcript attached. Tribunal date confirmed, August 27th, A. Bones. August 27th, 6 days. Harry looked at the rose bed. He looked at the weeds. He thought, all right, Sirius. 6 days. The magic ran through him in circuits, warm and steady and completely his own, and somewhere down the garden the lavender that Petunia grew along the far fence, real lavender, just a plant, nothing embedded in it but the smell, moved in a wind that wasn't blowing. Harry put his hands back in the soil and pulled. Chapter 5, The Trial of Sirius Black, reopened. The ministry holding facility smelled like antiseptic and old stone, which was a significant improvement over Azkaban, where Harry understood the smell was considerably worse. The corridor leading to the medical wing was painted the institutional green of places that had been designed for function rather than comfort, lit by overhead fixtures that buzzed faintly, and patrolled by a single Auror at each end who had clearly been briefed on Harry's Provision 14b, standing and was managing their reaction to a 7-year-old walking through a secure ministry facility with varying degrees of success. Harry walked the corridor with Augusta on his left and Sharp Fong on his right, which he was coming to think of as his default formation, authority on both flanks, clarity in the center. The tribunal was in 4 hours. This visit was not on the official schedule. It had been arranged by Amelia Bones, quietly, 3 days ago, with the understanding that it was personal rather than procedural and that the record of it would be minimal. At the end of the medical wing corridor, the Auror on duty, a young witch with careful eyes, checked Augusta's credentials, checked the letter from Bones, looked at Harry for a beat longer than necessary, and opened the door. The room was small and plainly furnished, bed, table, 2 chairs, a window with reinforced glass looking into a courtyard where a single tree was doing its late August work of preparing to let things go. The room was clean and warm and had a plate of food on the table that was mostly finished, which was the detail Harry noticed first, because it meant he was eating, which meant something in him was still orienting toward the future. Sirius Black was sitting in the chair by the window. Harry had tried to prepare himself for this and found, arriving at the actual moment, that preparation was a limited instrument. The man in the chair was thin in the way that goes past lean into something structural, not just less weight but less of everything, like something had been taken from the basic substance. His hair was long, dark, matted in places where the healers hadn't yet finished their work. His face was angular in a way that was probably handsome underneath the deprivation, with gray eyes that were, Harry registered this immediately and with relief, present. Aware. Not the absent, hollowed quality that the legal documents' clinical descriptions of long-term Azkaban exposure had described. Whatever had happened to the rest of him, his eyes were there. Those eyes found Harry the moment the door opened. And something in Sirius Black's face broke open. Not dramatically. It didn't collapse or crumple, it was more like a room that has been shut and locked for years suddenly having the window opened. Just that. Just air and light getting in where there had been neither. Harry, Sirius said. His voice was rough, underused, but steady. He said the name the way people say things they have thought about many times in the dark. Harry crossed the room and sat in the other chair, across from him, close enough. Augusta remained at the door, which she closed behind her, leaving them with the minimum of presence required to satisfy the facility's regulations. They looked at each other. Harry thought about everything he'd planned to say, the practical things, the tribunal overview, the Pettigrew confirmation, the estate documentation, and understood, arriving here, that none of it was what this moment required. All of that was for later. This moment required something else. I know it wasn't you, Harry said. Sirius's jaw tightened. His hands, which had been resting on the chair arms, gripped the worn wood briefly. They told me about Pettigrew, he said. Yesterday. He stopped. Started again. 6 years. Knowing nobody believed me and knowing I couldn't prove it and knowing, he looked at the window, at the courtyard tree, at the August light. I thought about James every day. And Lily. And you. He looked back at Harry. I thought about you constantly. I had one photograph, they let me keep one, from before. You were about 3 months old. James had you and you were looking at him like he was the most interesting thing in the world. Something in his voice was working hard but holding. And then Dumbledore put you with Petunia and I thought, even if I could get out, even if anyone believed me, you were with her. Which meant, I know, Harry said. I know about the will. I know about what my mum said about Petunia's household. He paused. I got out. Not all the way yet, but mostly. Sirius looked at him. The Gringotts ritual, he said. He'd been told the outline, Harry understood, but not all of it. Yes. They said, the healers said you found 52 potions. Yes. Sirius's expression moved through something that was rage and grief simultaneously, a complicated internal weather that he was clearly working to manage in the presence of a child. Dumbledore. Yes, Harry said. Sirius was quiet for a moment. His gray eyes had gone to a particular quality, not cold, not heated, something more fundamental than either, the look of someone recalibrating their entire understanding of events they thought they'd understood. Tell me something, Harry said. About my parents. Not about any of this, just something. Sirius looked at him. The recalibration shifted, making room for something else. He was quiet for a moment, sorting through 6 years of compressed memory. Your dad, he said, was the worst singer I've ever heard. Genuinely terrible. He didn't know it. We spent 7 years at Hogwarts sharing a dormitory and every morning he'd hum whatever was in his head and it was always slightly wrong, always just off the note, and he had no idea. Something happened in Sirius's face, the lines of deprivation and grief didn't leave, but something warmer moved through them. Your mum knew. She told me once, second year, that she found it endearing but she'd never tell him because his confidence was the best part of the whole thing. He paused. She was right. Harry didn't say anything. He just let it land. She used to argue with Dumbledore, Sirius said. Lily, I mean. Not disrespectfully, she respected him. But she didn't defer. She'd sit in order meetings and wait until he finished and then just, quietly, specifically, say the thing that was wrong with whatever he'd said. He'd listen. He always listened. I think she was one of the only people he actually listened to. He looked at Harry. After she died, I thought about that a lot. About how she was the one who would have pushed back. Harry thought, I know. I think that's part of why she's gone. He didn't say it. But he held it. The tribunal is in 4 hours, Harry said, returning to the practical because the practical was now the way through to the rest of it. Bones has Pettigrew's Veritaserum testimony. Augusta has the procedural backing. I have the will documentation and the estate records showing the guardianship obstruction. He looked at Sirius steadily. It should be clean. The evidence is complete. But I want to know if there's anything else you can tell me, about what happened that night, or the days before, that the tribunal should know. Sirius looked at him with an expression that was trying to reconcile the child in front of him with the question being asked. You're 7, Sirius said. I know, Harry said. Is there anything else? Sirius blinked. Then, despite everything, despite 6 years of Azkaban and no trial and the photograph in the dark and all the rest of it, he let out a short sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Brief, surprised, helpless. James would have lost his mind, Sirius said. In the best possible way. He looked at Harry with the grey eyes that were present and aware, and something in them was beginning to be, cautiously, carefully, something like hope. There's something about the night. When I found Peter, before the explosion. He screamed my name. Loud enough for witnesses to hear. That's important, it puts him at the scene ahead of the explosion, which means the Ministry report's timeline is wrong, which means the 12 Muggles weren't killed in a confrontation with you, Harry said. Pettigrew created the explosion himself, screamed your name to establish a witness record, and then transformed. The confrontation narrative doesn't hold because there wasn't one. Sirius stared at him. I read the arrest report, Harry said. The timeline bothered me from the first time I looked at it. Another silence. Then Sirius said, quietly, how long have you been working on this? Since July 31st, Harry said. Sirius did the arithmetic. That's less than a month. It's been a busy month, Harry said. The tribunal chamber was smaller than the Wizengamot's main hall, a side chamber on level 10, designed for appeals and reviews rather than full sessions, with a curved bench for 3 presiding judges rather than the full ring of seats. It had the same stone walls and high ceiling, the same quality of institutional gravity, but more compressed, more focused, like the main hall's intention distilled. The 3 presiding judges were already seated when Harry arrived with Augusta and Sharp Fang. He recognized 2 of them, Ogden in the center, his broad shoulders squared, his expression giving nothing away, Griselda Marchbanks on the left, the sharp-eyed older witch who had seconded Augusta's motion in the main session. The third was someone Harry didn't know, a younger wizard with close-cropped hair and the careful attention of someone who takes the weight of a thing seriously. Amelia Bones was at the presenting table to the right, with her documents arranged in the Bones manner, completely organized, nothing superfluous. She acknowledged Harry with a nod when he entered and gestured to the seats in the front row of the small gallery. Harry sat. The gallery was more full than he'd expected. Augusta had mentioned that the Wizengamot community was paying close attention to this tribunal, and the evidence of this was in the 20 or so people occupying the gallery seats, some in robes that suggested official capacity, some in ordinary wizarding dress, all with the focused presence of people who are there because the outcome matters to them personally. Harry recognized several faces from the Wizengamot session, including a few of the persuadable ones who had been doing political mathematics. He did not see Dumbledore. He noted this, filed it, and focused on the bench. At 9 o'clock precisely, the door at the chamber's side opened and Sirius Black was escorted in. He had been cleaned up since Harry's visit that morning, fresh robes, hair tied back, the angular face clean-shaven by the healers. He was still thin, still carried the residue of 6 years in every line of him, but he walked in without assistance and without hesitation, and when he took the chair at the center of the floor, the same position Harry had occupied in the main chamber 2 weeks ago, he held himself with a dignity that was not performed. It was the dignity of someone who knows the truth and has always known it and is finally, in a room where that truth is going to be the point. He looked at Harry once, briefly, in the gallery. Harry looked back. Something passed between them that wasn't yet what it would become. They were two people who had found each other under improbable circumstances, still learning the shape of the connection, but it was real, and it was solid, and it held. Ogden called the session to order. Amelia Bones presented the case with the focused precision of someone who had been building toward this for the 11 days since the DMLE investigation opened and was not wasting a moment of the tribunal's time on anything that wasn't essential. She laid out the evidence in order, the arrest report with its absent trial documentation, the Gringotts vault signature placing Pettigrew in Devon in 1985, the confession, delivered under Veritaserum, with the full transcript distributed to each judge, the forensic analysis confirming Pettigrew's presence at the scene prior to the explosion, contradicting the narrative of a confrontation, and the physical evidence of 12 years as an unregistered animagus, which Bones presented with a brevity that was itself eloquent, the registration records showing no rat animagus ever registered, Pettigrew's own confirmation of the transformation, and the DMLE finding that the animagus form had been active for approximately 12 years and 3 months. The Ministry's original case against Sirius Black, Bones said, to the bench, rested on 3 evidentiary pillars: eyewitness accounts placing Black at the scene, the physical evidence of one finger belonging to Peter Pettigrew, and the investigator's conclusion that no other explanation fit the known facts. She paused. The first pillar stands: Black was at the scene. He has never denied this. He went to find Pettigrew. The second pillar has been dismantled: the finger belongs to a living person who severed it himself. The third pillar has been dismantled: there is now a complete alternative explanation, confirmed by the primary witness, under conditions that do not permit falsehood. She closed the presentation folder. The charges against Sirius Orion Black were wrong at the time of arrest and have been wrong for 6 years. I am requesting full exoneration, immediate release, and the formal expungement of all records. She sat down. Ogden looked at the other 2 judges. Marchbanks was already nodding slightly, not dramatically, just the small definitive nod of someone whose arithmetic has arrived at its answer. The younger wizard at the far end, whose name Harry had learned was Alderton, was looking at the Pettigrew confession transcript with the expression of someone reading something that will require significant internal reorganization. "Mr. Black," Ogden said. "Do you wish to make a statement?" Sirius looked at the bench for a moment. He looked at the gallery, at Harry in the front row. He looked back at the bench. "I want to say something about Peter," he said. His voice was level. "Not about what he did, that's in the transcript. I want to say, he was my friend. He was James's friend. We were like brothers, all 4 of us, for 7 years at school and after. And I know that doesn't change anything about what he did. I know that's not," he stopped. "I don't have anger for him that makes sense to me yet. I don't know what I feel about him yet. But I want this tribunal to know that what he did wasn't done by a stranger. It was done by someone James trusted completely. Someone James would have died for." He paused. "Someone James did die for, in a sense." He looked at the bench steadily. I've had 6 years in Azkaban to think about trust and what it costs when it's wrong. I don't have anything else to say. Ogden looked at him for a long moment. The tribunal will deliberate, he said. They deliberated for 22 minutes. Harry sat in the gallery with Augusta and waited. Augusta did not attempt to fill the silence with reassurance, which Harry appreciated. She sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the chamber door and waited with the composure of someone who has done all the available preparation and is now simply allowing the process to run. In the gallery around them, quiet conversations were happening. Harry caught fragments, names, reactions, the particular quality of discussion that follows something that can't be taken back. He heard Dumbledore's name twice, in tones that told him more about the gallery's current view than anything said directly. He heard 6 years said by someone in a voice that made those 2 words carry the full weight of what they meant. He heard, very quietly, from 2 seats over, an older witch say to her companion, "I voted to keep him out of the chair. Marchbanks and I discussed it, there weren't the numbers." But next session, she saw Harry looking and stopped. Harry nodded at her. She looked startled, then nodded back. The chamber door opened. The 3 judges returned to the bench. Ogden was carrying a short document, the tribunal's formal finding, 1 page, because a finding this clear doesn't need more. He read it standing. In the matter of Sirius Orain Black, arrested November 2, 1981, held at Her Majesty's Prison Azkaban without formal trial or legal proceeding, this tribunal finds, unanimously, that the charges of murder and conspiracy were unsupported by the available evidence at the time of arrest and are comprehensively refuted by the evidence presented today. Ogden's voice was steady, carrying. The tribunal further finds that the failure to conduct a trial was a serious procedural failure constituting wrongful imprisonment under the Magical Persons Act. He looked at Sirius directly. Sirius Orain Black is hereby exonerated of all charges. The record of his arrest will be expunged. The Ministry of Magic will issue a formal statement of wrongful imprisonment. He lowered the document. Mr. Black. You are free. The gallery produced a sound, not quite applause, not quite speech, something between them, the sound of a room releasing something it has been holding. Harry let out a breath. He looked at Sirius and Sirius was very still, the way people go still when something enormous is happening to them and their body doesn't know what to do with it yet. Then Sirius put his face in his hands, briefly, just for a moment, and it was the most private gesture Harry had seen in a room full of people, and he looked away to give it its privacy. When he looked back, Sirius was looking at him. Told you, Harry said. Quietly, just to him. Sirius let out a sound that was trying to be a laugh and was also something else. Yeah, he said. You did. The aftermath of a tribunal is administrative before it is anything else, which was both practical and, in its way, merciful. Paperwork gives people something to do with their hands while the enormous things settle. Bones had the formal release documents prepared in advance, because Bones prepared everything in advance. She processed them with the focused efficiency that was apparently her permanent state of being, while a healer conducted a formal assessment of Sirius's condition for the record, while Augusta spoke with Ogden in a corner of the gallery with the quiet intensity of people making plans that would become visible in due course. Harry stood beside Sirius while the paperwork moved around them, which was where he wanted to be. You lived with Petunia, Sirius said, between signatures. Yes. For 6 years. Yes. James would have been furious, Sirius said. Lily would have been, he stopped. I can't think of a word strong enough for what Lily would have been. I know, Harry said. I read her will. She was thorough about it. Sirius looked at him. How are you so? He searched for the word. Practical? Harry suggested. That's not the word I was looking for, but it's accurate. Sirius signed another document that Bones held in front of him. I think the word I wanted was solid. You're 7 and you are. He looked at Harry with the gray eyes that were steadier now than they'd been that morning, more present, more here. You're very solid, Harry. Harry thought about 52 potions designed to make him smaller, and about a core that had been running at 30%, and about what happened when you removed all of that and let a person be the size they actually were. I got some help being that way, he said. Ragnarok, Sirius said. Augusta. Bones. Yes. And, Harry paused. You, actually. The fact of you. Knowing you existed and knowing what the record said and knowing it was wrong, that was something to work toward. He looked up at Sirius. Having something to work toward helps. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Something was happening in his expression that was too complex to name. It was the look of someone receiving something they had given up expecting to receive, and finding it difficult and wonderful in equal measure. Guardianship, Sirius said. When you're ready, Harry said. There's no rush on the timeline. I'm emancipated now, so legally, I know, Sirius said. I was told. He looked at the window. Harry. I want to be your guardian. I've wanted to be your guardian since before you were born. James asked me when your mum was about 6 months along and I said yes before he finished the sentence. He paused. But I want you to know it's not an obligation. It's not because James wanted it, or because it's legally neat, or because it's the right procedural thing to do. I want it because, he stopped. Because I'm James's son, Harry said. Because you're you, Sirius said. I've been talking to you for 12 hours over 2 meetings and I already know that you are, he gestured, slightly helplessly, at Harry's general existence. Exactly yourself. Whatever they tried to do to that, it didn't work. Harry looked at him. He thought about what Sharpfang had said in the ritual room. Your core has been running at approximately 30% of its natural capacity. He thought about what he was at 30%. He thought about what he might be at 100. No, Harry said. It didn't. The Ministry press office released the statement on Sirius's exoneration at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Harry heard about this from Augusta, who received it via owl before the ink was dry, and who read the statement aloud in the Ministry canteen where they'd retreated after the tribunal paperwork finished, the 4 of them, Harry, Augusta, Sirius, and Bones, who had joined them with the look of someone allowing herself exactly 1 cup of tea as acknowledgement of a job completed. The statement was 2 paragraphs and said what it needed to say without flourish. Sirius Black exonerated, wrongfully imprisoned, formal apology from the Ministry, full record expungement. It did not address the question of how or why the wrongful imprisonment had happened, which Bones said was deliberate. That question was part of the ongoing DMLE investigation and would be addressed in its own time. Sirius read the statement and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, I need to find a place to sleep tonight that isn't a Ministry facility. Linwood, Harry said. Sirius looked at him. The Potter family seat, Harry said. In the Welsh borders. It's intact, preservation charms, maintained, just waiting for a claimant. I'm the claimant. You're my, he paused, choosing the word deliberately. Family. It can be ours for now. Sirius blinked. He seemed to be processing several things simultaneously. You've already organized this, he said. Not accusatorially. Just with the slightly stunned recognition that Harry had. I old Ragnarok this morning, Harry said. He confirmed the estate access rights extend to authorized family members. The property will have been provisioned with the basics. I asked him to arrange it. We can go tonight. Augusta was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone keeping a large feeling appropriately contained. Bones was looking at her teacup with a very small smile that she wasn't bothering to suppress. I've been in Azkaban for 6 years, Sirius said, and you want to take me to a house in Wales tonight. It's a manor, actually, Harry said. But yes. Sirius looked at him. Okay, he said. Yes. Let's do that. Good, Harry said. There's also a list of things we need to discuss about the next phase, but that can wait until tomorrow. Sirius stared at him. The next phase. Dumbledore's still chief warlock, Harry said simply. The DMLE investigation is running. Ogden's special inquiry is running. But there's more to do. Sirius opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Bones, who shrugged with the eloquence of someone who has been watching Harry operate for 11 days and has come to a specific conclusion about him, and looked back at Harry. James, he said, would have absolutely loved this version of events. The singing version or the estate management version? Sirius made a sound that was unmistakably and completely a laugh, not the brief, surprised one from that morning but a real one, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and has been missing for a long time. It changed his face entirely, reorganized it into something younger, something that briefly and powerfully suggested the person he'd been before Azkaban. Augusta put her teacup down with a decisive click. The port key to Linwood leaves from level 2 in 20 minutes, she said, because Augusta had organized this before Harry had even thought to mention it. I suggest everyone finish their tea. Linwood was everything the estate documents had promised and several things they hadn't. It sat in a shallow valley in the Welsh borders, surrounded by hills that were going amber and gold in the August evening, a broad stone manor with ivy on the east face and a long approach road lined with oak trees old enough that they remembered being young. The preservation charms had kept it in the exact condition of its last occupation, which the estate record said had been November 1981, when James and Lily had left it for the last time to go into hiding at Godric's Hollow, and so the house held a particular quality of time, like a room where someone has recently been. There were books on shelves in the library that Harry's father had clearly been reading, bookmarks in 3 of them, spines worn at favorite passages. In the kitchen, a ceramic mug with a crack in the handle that someone had repaired with a slightly imperfect reparo, the crack still faintly visible. In the upstairs corridor, a framed photograph of 2 people Harry recognized from the few images he'd found in the estate documents, young, laughing, standing in front of this house in what looked like early summer, the woman with red hair leaning into the man with dark hair and a familiar face that hit Harry somewhere below the ribs with the force of something both expected and entirely unprepared for. He stood in front of that photograph for a long moment. Sirius came up beside him. He looked at the photograph. He was quiet for a long time. That was the summer before your mum got pregnant, Sirius said eventually. I was there that day. James had just done something brilliant in the garden, I forget what, and Lily couldn't stop laughing. I took the photograph because I thought, he paused. I thought it was a good day. Worth keeping. Harry looked at his parents in the photograph, laughing in front of the house that was now his. They were young, genuinely young, in the way that you can see in photographs, the unburdened quality of people who don't yet know all the things they're going to know. His father's hair was doing the same impossible things Harry's hair did. His mother's eyes were green. They knew Voldemort was coming, Harry said. That summer. They knew the war was building. Yes, Sirius said. And they still looked like that. Yes, Sirius said. They didn't, he stopped, finding the right words. They refused to let what was coming take the present away from them. Both of them. It was something they decided, I think, consciously. That they were going to be happy anyway. That fear wasn't going to be the biggest thing in the room. Harry looked at his parents in the photograph, laughing in the summer, refusing to be afraid. He thought, I understand that. He thought, I already knew how to do that. They taught me before I was born. Come on, Harry said. Ragnarok had the kitchen provisioned. I can cook. Sirius looked at him. You can cook. I've been cooking for the Dursleys since I was 5, Harry said, moving down the corridor toward the stairs. I'm actually quite good at it. Sirius followed him down the stairs of the house that was theirs now, in the Welsh border evening, and said, Harry. When we've got all of this sorted, Dumbledore, the investigation, all of it, what do you want? For yourself. Not strategy. Just want. Harry thought about it as he descended the stairs, his hand on a banister his father had touched, in a house that had been waiting for him. This, he said. Something like this. Something real. He paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back up at Sirius. And Hogwarts. In 4 years, I want to go to Hogwarts knowing exactly who I am. He paused. Not who Dumbledore decided I should be. Sirius came down the last few stairs and looked at him with the grey eyes that were steadier every hour, more present, more his own. Then that's what we're working toward, Sirius said. Yes, Harry said. That's exactly what we're working toward. He turned and went into the kitchen, and the house settled around them with the quality of something that has been empty for too long and has finally remembered what it was made for.